The Alpha King just ripped away my disguise in front of 1,000 people, and now I'm standing where I swore I'd never be. If you want to know how a girl who tried to disappear became the one who changed everything, stay until the end. You won't believe what happens next. Drop a like, comment which city you're watching from, and let's dive in. The selection hall smelled like desperation masked by expensive perfume. Elara Vance kept her head down, her right leg dragging just enough to draw the exact kind of attention she needed, the kind that made people look away. She moved slowly through the marble corridor, her plain gray dress a deliberate insult among the sea of silk and jewels. Around her, young women preened and whispered, their faces painted with hope and ambition. They wanted to be seen, they wanted to be chosen. Elara wanted to vanish. "Did you see her?" Someone murmured to her left. "The Limp? Poor thing. She won't last past the first inspection." Why did she even come? Elara's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Let them pity her. Let them dismiss her. That was the entire point. The great doors to the throne hall loomed ahead, carved from black wood and inlaid with silver, a monument to power, to tradition, to a system that had chewed up women like her mother and spit them out when they were no longer useful. 20 years ago, her mother had stood in this very hall, chosen by the then Alpha King as a secondary mate. For 3 years, she'd lived in luxury, bearing the title but never the respect. Then, when a younger woman caught his eye, her mother had been quietly dismissed. No ceremony, no acknowledgement, just a carriage in the night and a one-way trip back to obscurity. Elara had been 7 years old. She remembered her mother's face, not broken, but hollowed out, emptied. She would not end up like that. She would not be chosen. She would not be used. The doors swung open. The throne hall was vast, designed to make everyone who entered feel small. Columns rose like stone trees toward a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of conquest and submission. At the far end, on a raised dais of obsidian, sat the Alpha King, Kyle Draven. Elara had never seen him in person before. The stories painted him as brutal, calculating, a man who had consolidated power through ruthless efficiency. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of winter storms. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting on the arm of his throne, watching the procession of women with an expression that gave away nothing. Around him stood his council, Lord Terran, the master of ceremonies, a man with a smile too wide and eyes too sharp. Lady Marin, the keeper of bloodlines, cold and precise. And General Voss, the king's enforcer, a mountain of a man with scars that told stories of violence. "Form the line," Lord Terran called out, his voice echoing off the stone. The selection will proceed in order of family rank. Elara positioned herself near the back, among the daughters of minor houses and merchant families. The Limp helped. Several women gave her sideways glances and moved slightly away, as if weakness were contagious. She kept her breathing steady, her expression neutral. Just a few more hours. Just get through the inspection, be deemed unworthy, and go home. The inspection began. One by one, women stepped forward onto a raised platform in the center of the hall. Lord Terran read their names and lineages while Lady Marin examined them with clinical detachment, checking teeth, measuring proportions, assessing breeding potential like livestock at market. Some women were dismissed immediately. Others were marked with a silver ribbon and told to wait in an adjacent chamber. Elara's stomach churned. "Next," Lord Terran called. A girl from a minor noble house stepped forward, her hands shaking. She was pretty, with honey-colored hair and wide green eyes. Lady Marin circled her once, twice, then nodded. A silver ribbon was tied around the girl's wrist. She looked like she might cry from relief or terror. It was hard to tell which. The line moved forward. Elara's turn was coming. She rehearsed it in her mind. Step up, let them see the Limp, maybe mention a history of illness, be polite but forgettable. They'd dismiss her. They had to. Elara Vance, daughter of the House of Vance, formerly connected to the king's secondary line. Her blood went cold. Every head in the room turned. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The daughter of that woman? I thought they'd been erased from the records. Why is she even here? Elara forced herself to move forward, her manufactured limp suddenly feeling too obvious, too staged. She climbed onto the platform, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lady Marin approached, her face a mask of disapproval. "You have a deformity," Lady Marin stated flatly. "An injury from childhood," Elara replied, keeping her voice steady. "It never healed properly." "Can you bear children?" The question was so blunt, so devoid of humanity, that Elara almost laughed. "I have no reason to believe otherwise." Lady Marin's eyes narrowed. "Walk across the platform. Let us see the extent of the damage." Elara obeyed, exaggerating the drag of her right foot just slightly. The whispers grew louder. She could feel judgment pressing in from all sides. "Unacceptable," Lady Marin announced. "Physical imperfection of this magnitude disqualifies—" "Stop!" The single word cut through the noise like a blade. The Alpha King had spoken. The hall fell silent. Every person froze. Even the guards stationed along the walls seemed to hold their breath. Kael Draven rose from his throne. He moved with the kind of controlled power that suggested violence was always an option, just waiting beneath the surface. He descended the dais steps slowly, his eyes locked on Elara. Her instinct screamed at her to run. He crossed the distance between them in seconds. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and built like a weapon. But it was his eyes that held her, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. "That limp," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "is a performance." Elara's breath caught. "I don't know what you favor the right leg when you think no one is watching, but switch to the left when you want sympathy." He tilted his head slightly. "You're also wearing shoes a size too large to make your gait appear more unstable. Clever, but not clever enough." Panic spiked through her chest. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin some story, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He already knew. Lying would only make it worse. "Why?" he asked. The hall was silent, waiting. Hundreds of eyes watched. Elara felt the weight of it crushing down on her shoulders. She could give him the safe answer, claim injury, claim ignorance, bow her head and beg forgiveness. Or she could tell the truth. "Because I don't want to be here," she said, her voice louder than she intended. "Because I watched this system destroy my mother. Because I refuse to be paraded and inspected and chosen like I'm something to be owned." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lord Terran stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Your Majesty, this is an outrage. She's committed fraud against the crown. She should be—" Silence. Kael didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Lord Terran's mouth snapped shut. The king's gaze hadn't left Elara's face. She forced herself to meet it, to not look away. If she was going to be punished, she'd face it head on. "You think the selection is cruel," Kael said. It wasn't a question. "I think it's a system designed to break women and call it tradition." More gasps. Someone in the crowd actually shrieked. The corner of Kael's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "And yet you came anyway. Because refusing an invitation from the Alpha King is a crime. You made it impossible to say no. So you chose deception instead of honesty." "I chose survival." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without warning, he bent and swept her off her feet, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Elara yelped in surprise, her hands instinctively grabbing his shoulders for balance. "What are you? Put me down!" "No!" He carried her across the platform, past the gaping crowd, toward the front of the selection line. Elara's face burned with humiliation and fury. She could feel every eye in the hall on her, could hear the shocked whispers building into a roar. "Stop it," she hissed. "This is—" "You wanted to disappear," Kael said calmly, still walking. "But you can't hide from what you are." "And what am I?" He set her down at the very front of the line, in the space reserved for the highest-ranking noblewomen, and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Honest, even when it costs you." Then he turned and addressed the hall, his voice carrying to every corner. "Elara Vance will remain in the selection. Anyone who questions this decision will answer to me personally." He didn't wait for a response. He simply walked back to his throne and sat down, his expression once again unreadable. Elara stood frozen, her mind reeling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be dismissed, forgotten, sent home. Instead, she was standing at the front of the most prestigious line in the kingdom, marked by the king's personal intervention. Around her, the noblewomen stared with open hostility. She'd been handed the one thing they all wanted, the king's attention, and she hadn't even wanted it. Continue, Kael commanded. The selection resumed, but everything had changed. The other women looked at Elara like she was either a threat or a disease. Lord Terran's smile had turned brittle. Even Lady Marin regarded her with something close to fascination. As the hours dragged on, Elara remained at the front, unable to escape, unable to protest. Every time she thought about walking away, she caught sight of the guards stationed by the doors. Not to keep people out, but to keep them in. By the time the sun began to set, 30 women had been chosen to remain. Elara was one of them. That night, the chosen women were housed in the palace's east wing, in rooms designed to be luxurious cages. Elara's chamber was larger than her entire home had been. Silk curtains, a four-poster bed, a balcony overlooking the frost-covered gardens. It should have been beautiful. It felt like a trap. She stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the city, her mind racing. She'd tried to avoid this. She'd planned so carefully, and yet here she was, exactly where she'd sworn she'd never be. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in," she said, expecting a servant. Instead, a young woman entered, barely older than Elara, with auburn hair and a dress that marked her as minor nobility. She carried a silver tray with tea and bread. "I'm Mira," the woman said softly. "From the House of Grain. I wanted to introduce myself. We're on the same floor." Elara relaxed slightly. "Thank you. I'm Elara Vance. Everyone knows who you are now." Mira set the tray down and gave her a tentative smile. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, by the way, telling the king the truth like that. Brave or stupid? Maybe both. Mira poured tea into 2 cups. "But you said what the rest of us were thinking. This whole thing, it's barbaric. My older sister went through this 5 years ago. She wasn't chosen, and she said it was the best thing that ever happened to her." Elara took the offered cup, grateful for the warmth. "Then why are you here?" Mira's smile faded. "Because my family's debts are crushing us. If I'm chosen as even a secondary mate, the financial compensation could save my parents' estate. So here I am, pretending I want this." It was the same story Elara had heard a dozen times. Women trapped by economics, by family pressure, by a system that gave them no real choice. She thought of her mother again, of the hollow look in her eyes after she'd been discarded. "We're all pretending," Elara said quietly. "Not you. You were the only one who told the truth." Before Elara could respond, another knock echoed through the room, harder, more authoritative. Mira's eyes widened. "I should go." She slipped out quickly, leaving Elara alone to face whoever was at the door. Elara set down her tea and crossed the room, her heart already sinking. When she opened the door, a guard stood in the hallway. One of the king's personal detail, judging by the black and silver uniform. "Miss Vance, His Majesty requests your presence." Elara's stomach dropped. "Now?" "Immediately." She had no choice. She followed the guard through winding corridors, past tapestries depicting battles and bloodlines, past servants who averted their eyes. The deeper they went into the palace, the colder it became, as if warmth itself couldn't survive this far into the heart of power. They stopped outside a set of doors carved with wolves. The guard knocked twice, then pushed them open. "Miss Vance, Your Majesty." Elara stepped inside and the doors closed behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling. The room was a study, walls lined with books, a fireplace burning low, maps spread across a heavy oak desk. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight, was Kael Draven. He didn't turn immediately. "Do you know why I chose to continue the selection this year?" he asked. Elara stayed near the door, her defenses up. "To secure alliances, to produce heirs, to maintain the appearance of tradition. All practical reasons." He finally turned to face her. "But not the truth." "Then why?" "Because the council insisted. Because the old families demanded it. Because refusing would have cost me political capital I need for other battles." He moved to the desk, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "But I didn't expect to find someone who saw through the entire charade. I'm not special. Half the women in that hall know it's a charade. They're just better at playing along." "But you refuse to play." He held out one of the glasses. "Why?" Elara didn't take it. "I already told you. I watched what this did to my mother." Your mother was chosen as a secondary mate to my father. Kael's expression didn't change, but something in his voice shifted. She was dismissed when I was 15, I remember. The admission caught Elara off guard. You remember her? I remember all of them. Every woman my father chose and then discarded when he grew bored. I was forced to watch, to learn, to understand that this was how power worked. He set the glass down, untouched. I hated it then. I hate it now. Elara stared at him, trying to reconcile this with the image of the ruthless Alpha King. Then why continue it? Because changing a system from within requires you to first be part of it, and because dismantling centuries of tradition overnight would tear this kingdom apart. But I can change it, slowly, carefully. He met her eyes. Starting with you. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you a choice, the one thing no woman in this selection has ever been given. You can leave. Tonight, I'll have you escorted home with a formal letter of dismissal. No shame, no consequences. You'll be free. Elara's heart leapt. This was what she wanted. The escape she'd been desperately seeking. She should have said yes immediately, but something stopped her. And if I stay? She heard herself ask. Kael's expression was unreadable. Then you stay as yourself. No performances, no pretending. You speak your mind. You challenge everything you find unjust, and you help me tear down this corrupt system from the inside. But you do it in full view of the court, which means you'll make enemies, powerful ones. That's not a choice, that's a threat. It's the only kind of choice anyone in power can offer, safety in obscurity or danger in significance. He paused. But it's still more than anyone else here will give you. Elara's mind raced. She thought of Mira, trapped by debt. She thought of all the other women who'd been chosen, who'd smiled and performed and pretended because they had no other option. She thought of her mother, hollowed out by a system that had treated her like a temporary amusement. And she thought of what Kael had just offered, not love, not romance, but something potentially more valuable, partnership in destruction, the chance to burn down the very thing that had hurt her family. I'll stay, she said, but not for you. For every woman who's been through this and had no choice at all. For the first time, Kael Draven smiled. It was slight, barely there, but genuine. Good, because you're going to need that anger for what comes next. What comes next? Tomorrow, the real selection begins. And now that you're at the front of the line, every noble family in the kingdom will be looking for ways to destroy you. Elara lifted her chin. Let them try. Kael's smile widened, just a fraction. I was hoping you'd say that. He moved to the door and opened it, signaling the guard. But before Elara could leave, he spoke once more. Your mother, he said quietly. When my father dismissed her, I tried to stop it. I was too young, had no authority, but I tried, for what it's worth. Elara looked back at him, this man who held absolute power but claimed to be trapped by it. She didn't know if she believed him, didn't know if it mattered. She never mentioned it, Elara said, but she spent the rest of her life telling me to stay invisible, to never come to the capital, to never catch a king's attention. She paused at the threshold. I guess I failed. No, Kael said. You chose a different kind of invisibility, the kind where you pretend to be powerless while gathering strength. That's far more dangerous. Elara left without responding, but his words echoed in her mind all the way back to her chambers. She'd come here to disappear. Instead, she'd been thrust into the brightest spotlight in the kingdom. And despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the overwhelming sense that she'd just made a terrible mistake, a small part of her was glad, because for the first time in her life, Elara Vance was going to fight back. Dawn came too early, slicing through the curtains like a blade. Elara had barely slept, her mind churning with everything Kael had said. Partnership and destruction. Enemies. The real selection beginning today. She'd spent half the night pacing, the other half staring at the ornate ceiling, wondering if she'd made the right choice or simply traded one trap for another. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Vance? Breakfast is being served in the common hall. Your presence is required. Elara dressed quickly in the simplest gown provided. Deep blue, well-made, but without the excessive embellishment the other women seemed to favor. If she was going to be a target, she wouldn't make herself an easy one. She pulled her hair back severely, checked her reflection once, and stepped into the corridor. The common hall was already filled with the other chosen women, seated at a long table laden with food that could have fed her entire neighborhood for a week. Crystal goblets, silver platters, servants hovering like ghosts. The women turned as one when Elara entered, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Mira waved from near the end of the table, a small gesture of solidarity, but most faces held expressions ranging from cold curiosity to outright hostility. Elara had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the woman sitting at the head of the table, a stunning blonde with perfect posture and a smile that could cut glass. "You must be the infamous Elara Vance," the woman said, her voice honey-sweet and venomous. "Please, join us. I'm Lady Cassandra Thorne, daughter of Duke Thorne, first among the chosen. Or I was, until you arrived." Elara took the only empty seat, directly across from Cassandra. "I didn't ask for special treatment. No, you just embarrassed yourself in front of the entire court and somehow got rewarded for it." Cassandra sipped her tea delicately. "Tell me, is deception a family trait, or did you develop it all on your own?" Several women gasped. Others leaned forward, eager for conflict. Elara met Cassandra's eyes steadily. "I'd rather be honest about my deception than dishonest about my ambition." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cassandra's smile never wavered, but her knuckles went white around her teacup. "Careful. You might be the king's current curiosity, but curiosity fades. Breeding and bloodlines, those last forever." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Elara replied calmly. "I'm sure your pedigree will speak for itself." Before Cassandra could respond, the doors opened and Lord Terran swept in, his ceremonial robes billowing behind him. The women immediately straightened, conversation ceasing. "Good morning, ladies. I trust you slept well in your new accommodations." His smile was practiced, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. "Today marks the beginning of the evaluation period. Over the next 14 days, you will be tested on everything from court etiquette to household management, from cultural knowledge to physical grace. The king will observe these evaluations personally, along with his council." A murmur rippled through the gathered women. Elara's stomach tightened. 14 days of being watched, judged, measured against women who'd been training for this their entire lives. "Your first evaluation," Lord Terran continued, "begins in 1 hour. You will demonstrate your knowledge of the kingdom's history and political structure. Please proceed to the library." He paused, his gaze landing on Elara with unmistakable disdain. "All of you. No exceptions, no matter how unconventional your entry into this process may have been." He left without waiting for acknowledgement. The moment the doors closed, Cassandra stood gracefully. "Well, this should be entertaining. I wonder if Miss Vance even knows who the current dukes are, considering her family's reduced circumstances." "I know Duke Thorne purchased his title 15 years ago with gold earned from war profiteering," Elara said quietly, "and that his grandfather was a blacksmith before the family name was invented wholesale." The hall went absolutely silent. Cassandra's face flushed crimson. "How dare you? You asked if I knew the dukes. I do. All of them. Including which ones bought their positions and which ones inherited them through actual bloodlines." Elara stood, matching Cassandra's posture. "If we're going to compare breeding, let's be accurate about it." She walked out before anyone could respond, her heart hammering but her head high. Behind her, she heard an explosion of whispers, Cassandra's sharp voice demanding to know who'd told that lying commoner such slander. Mira's quiet laughter quickly suppressed. Elara didn't look back. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful woman in the selection, and she'd done it deliberately, publicly. But Cassandra had drawn first blood, and Elara had learned long ago that showing weakness to predators only encouraged the attack. The library was massive, 3 stories of books spiraling toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Tables were arranged in a semicircle facing a raised dais where 3 members of the King's Council sat. Lady Marin, as cold as yesterday. Lord Terran, still looking like he'd swallowed something sour, and an older man Elara didn't recognize, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. "Master Aldrich," Mira whispered beside her as they took their seats. "The king's chief historian. He wrote the official chronicle of the Draven dynasty." The women settled into their chairs, tension thick enough to choke on. Cassandra sat front and center, her earlier humiliation replaced by perfect composure. She was a predator who'd been slapped. Now she'd be twice as dangerous. Master Aldrich stood, adjusting his spectacles. Ladies, this evaluation is simple. I will ask questions about the kingdom's history, laws, and political structure. You will answer. Those who demonstrate adequate knowledge will continue in the selection. Those who do not, he let the implication hang. First question. Lady Cassandra, please tell us the significance of the Treaty of Blackwater. Cassandra stood smoothly. The Treaty of Blackwater, signed 200 years ago, ended the territorial wars between the northern and southern provinces. It established the current boundaries and created the Council of Dukes to advise the Alpha King, ensuring regional representation and governance. Correct. Please be seated. Master Aldrich made a notation. Next, Miss Elara Vance. Of course, they'd go straight for her. Elara stood, ignoring the weight of every eye in the room. Yes, Master Aldrich? Tell us about the line of succession. How is the Alpha King's heir determined? It was a trap question. The official answer was straightforward. The firstborn child of the primary mate inherited the throne. But the real answer, the complicated truth everyone in power knew but rarely acknowledged, was far messier. Elara chose truth over safety. Officially, the firstborn child of the primary mate becomes heir. But in practice, the Alpha King has absolute authority to name any of his children as successor, regardless of birth order or maternal lineage. This power has been exercised 7 times in the dynasty's history, usually when the firstborn was deemed unsuitable. Master Aldrich's eyebrows rose slightly. And what constitutes unsuitability? Weakness, madness, sterility, or, in the case of King Aldrich III's firstborn, simply being a daughter when the council preferred a son. The room erupted. That's sedition. Lord Terran stood, his face purple with rage. You're suggesting the council manipulates succession. I'm stating historical fact, Elara replied calmly. Princess Lyanna Draven was passed over for her younger brother despite being the legitimate heir. It's documented in Master Aldrich's own chronicle, chapter 17, page 243. All eyes swung to the historian, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his notes. The girl is technically correct, though it's rarely discussed in polite company. This is outrageous, Cassandra interjected, standing. She's turning this evaluation into a political circus. Is that the kind of influence we want near the throne? The question was about succession, Elara said. I answered it accurately. If accuracy is politically inconvenient, perhaps the real problem isn't my answer. Master Aldrich cleared his throat. Miss Vance, please be seated. Your knowledge is comprehensive. The questions continued, growing increasingly difficult. The women dropped one by one, stumbling over obscure treaties, mixing up historical dates, faltering on the complex web of noble allegiances that underpinned the kingdom's power structure. By the time the clock struck noon, only 15 women remained in their seats, including Elara, Cassandra, and Mira. We will break for lunch, Master Aldrich announced. This afternoon's evaluation will test practical skills, household management, resource allocation, and crisis response. Please return in 1 hour. The women filed out, exhausted and anxious. Elara started toward the door, but a hand on her arm stopped her. Miss Vance? A word. Lady Marin stood beside her, her expression unreadable. Elara's instincts screamed danger, but she couldn't refuse. Of course, my lady. They waited until the library emptied. Lady Marin moved to the window, gazing out at the frost-covered gardens. You made quite an impression yesterday, and again this morning. I answered the questions honestly. Honestly, yes. Lady Marin turned, her eyes sharp as cut diamonds. Do you know what honesty costs in this place? I'm beginning to learn. I doubt it. You see, Miss Vance, you think you're fighting a corrupt system. You think you're being brave by speaking uncomfortable truths. She stepped closer. But what you're actually doing is painting a target on your back that every ambitious family in this kingdom will aim for. I didn't ask to be part of this. And yet here you are. By your own choice, the king tells me. Lady Marin's lip curled slightly. Do you know why I oversee the bloodlines? Why I examine every woman who enters this selection like livestock? To ensure genetic superiority, to maintain the purity of the royal line. Wrong. I do it because someone has to protect these women from themselves. Lady Marin's voice dropped. Most of them dream of crowns and power. They don't understand that becoming the Alpha King's mate is a death sentence delivered slowly. I've watched it happen for 40 years. Women chosen, used, discarded, destroyed. The primary mates last longer, but they suffer more. And the children... She trailed off, something almost like pain crossing her face. Then why allow it to continue? Elara demanded. Because the alternative is worse. Without the selection, without this structure, there would be chaos. Noble families warring for proximity to power, assassinations, civil war. This system is cruel, Miss Vance, but it's controlled cruelty. It keeps the kingdom stable. Stable on the backs of broken women. Yes. Lady Marin met her eyes without flinching. And if you stay, you'll be one of them. The king may find your defiance refreshing now, but eventually you'll either bend or break. They always do. You're trying to scare me into leaving. I'm trying to give you the same choice your mother was never offered, the truth before the cage closes. Lady Marin moved toward the door. One more thing. That stunt you pulled with Lady Cassandra this morning, exposing her family's bought title, she won't forget that. And neither will Duke Thorn. I can handle Cassandra. It's not Cassandra you need to worry about. It's her father and his allies on the council. Lady Marin paused at the threshold. Watch your back, Miss Vance, because I guarantee no one else will. She left Elara alone in the vast library, surrounded by history and warning. Lunch was a tense affair. The remaining women barely spoke, eyeing each other like wolves measuring the competition. Cassandra held court at one end of the table, surrounded by allies from the highest noble families. Elara sat with Mira and two other women from minor houses, quiet, nervous girls named Rhea and Serena, who seemed relieved to find anyone who wasn't actively hostile. That was incredible, Rhea whispered. What you said about the succession, I've never heard anyone speak like that in public. It was reckless, Serena countered, glancing nervously toward Cassandra's end of the table. Now everyone knows you're not just smart, you're dangerous. Good, Elara said. Let them know. Mira squeezed her hand under the table. Just promise me you'll be careful. Lady Marin's right. Duke Thorn doesn't forgive insults. The afternoon evaluation was held in the palace's administrative wing, a maze of offices where the actual work of running a kingdom happened. The women were split into groups of 5 and given a crisis scenario to manage. Elara found herself grouped with Cassandra, clearly intentional, along with 3 neutral women who immediately looked uncomfortable. Lord Terran handed Cassandra a sealed document. You have 1 hour to devise a response to the situation described within. Your group will present your solution to the council. You may begin. Cassandra opened the document and read aloud, her voice dripping with disdain. A plague has broken out in the southern mining district. 500 workers are infected. The mines produce 80% of the kingdom's silver. Quarantine would destroy the economy. Continued work would spread the disease. What is your recommendation? The question hung in the air like a blade. Quarantine immediately, Elara said without hesitation. 500 lives are worth more than silver. Spoken like someone who's never managed anything more complex than a household budget, Cassandra shot back. If we shut down the mines, the economy collapses. No silver means no trade. No trade means no food imports. And before winter ends, 500 deaths become 50,000 from starvation. Then we find alternative revenue sources. Tax the noble estates, redirect military funds. Tax the nobles? Cassandra laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You really don't understand how power works, do you? The moment you threaten noble wealth, you lose their support. And without their support, the king has nothing. One of the neutral women, a brunette named Lydia, spoke up hesitantly. What if we quarantine just the infected workers, but keep the mines running with healthy replacements? Rotate shifts every 3 days? Isolate anyone showing symptoms? That's actually sensible, another woman added. Cassandra considered it, then shook her head. Too slow. The disease would spread among the replacement workers before we could contain it. Not if we implement health screenings every 6 hours, Elara countered. Early detection, immediate isolation. It would require significant medical resources, but it's possible. Medical resources we don't have, Cassandra said flatly. Then we requisition them, pull physicians from the capital, establish field hospitals, use military logistics to transport supplies. Elara was thinking out loud now, the plan forming as she spoke. It would be expensive and difficult, but it's the only solution that doesn't sacrifice either lives or economic stability. The other women looked between Cassandra and Elara, clearly torn. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. And who pays for this massive mobilization? The crown? The crown and the noble houses. Proportional contribution based on annual income. Elara met her gaze steadily. The nobles benefit most from the mines. They should bear the cost of protecting that investment. You're insane. The nobles would never agree. Then the king orders it. That's what absolute authority means. Cassandra stood abruptly, slamming her palms on the table. This is exactly why commoners have no place in governance. You think every problem can be solved by demanding sacrifice from those who actually keep this kingdom running. The nobles aren't piggy banks you can crack open whenever there's a crisis. They're allies, partners. And if you alienate them, then maybe they were never true allies to begin with, Elara interrupted, rising to face her. Real partnership means shared sacrifice. If the nobles can't accept that, they're just parasites with titles. The silence that followed was absolute. The other women stared, mouths open. Somewhere in the hallway outside, footsteps stopped abruptly. Someone had been listening. Cassandra's voice, when she finally spoke, was ice over steel. You just called half the kingdom's leadership parasites. In the palace, where anyone could be listening. She smiled, sharp and predatory. I wonder what Duke Thorn will think when he hears about this. He'll think I'm right, or he'll confirm it. We'll see. Cassandra gathered the papers. Since you're so confident in your radical solution, you can present it to the council, alone. I'll present the reasonable approach, limited quarantine, minimal economic disruption, pragmatic resource allocation. Fine, Elara said. Let them choose. The presentations were held in a small council chamber. Cassandra went first, delivering a polished, politically safe solution that prioritized economic stability while acknowledging the human cost. It was practical, reasonable, and would probably result in hundreds of preventable deaths. Then it was Elara's turn. She stood before the council, Lord Terran, Lady Marin, Master Aldrich, and 3 other advisors she didn't recognize, and laid out her plan. Full quarantine of infected workers, aggressive health screening, mobilization of medical resources, and proportional funding from the crown and noble estates. And how, Lord Terran asked coldly, do you propose to convince the noble houses to fund this endeavor? By reminding them that their wealth comes from the labor of workers they're now willing to sacrifice. And by pointing out that if those workers die, the mines close anyway, but with the added bonus of massive civil unrest. One of the unknown advisors leaned forward. You're threatening the nobles with rebellion? I'm stating facts. Workers who feel abandoned by the system that exploits them tend to stop cooperating with that system. It's happened 17 times in our kingdom's history. Would you like me to list them chronologically or by body count? Master Aldrich actually chuckled, quickly suppressed. Lady Marin's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes might have been approval. Your solution is expensive, logistically complex, and politically dangerous, but it's also the only one that doesn't guarantee mass casualties. She made a notation. I'll note it in my report to the king. The evaluation ended. The women were dismissed to their chambers to await the results. Elara had barely closed her door when Mira burst in, her face flushed with excitement and terror. Are you trying to get yourself killed? You basically called the entire noble class parasites. I called them that if they refused to help during a crisis, Elara corrected. That's not better. Do you know what happened to the last person who publicly criticized Duke Thorn? They found him in the river 3 days later, officially ruled an accident. Elara's blood ran cold. You think he'd... I think powerful people don't like being embarrassed by commoners, and you've embarrassed his daughter twice in 1 day. Mira grabbed her shoulders. Please be careful. I don't want to lose the only friend I've made here. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both women froze. Miss Vance? His Majesty requests your immediate presence. It was the same guard from last night. Elara's stomach twisted. This couldn't be good. I have to go, she told Mira. I'll wait up for you. Don't. If I'm not back by midnight, Elara trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. This time the guard led her to a different part of the palace. The war room, judging by the maps covering every wall, the strategic markers, the weapons displayed like artwork. Kael stood at a massive table, studying what looked like supply routes, his jaw tight with concentration. "Leave us," he said without looking up. The guard departed. The door closed with a heavy thud. Kael finally looked at her, and his expression was unreadable. "You've been here less than 2 days, and you've already declared war on half my council." I answered questions honestly. "That's what you asked me to do. I asked you to challenge the system, not commit political suicide." He moved around the table toward her. "Duke Thorn is demanding you be removed from the selection. Lord Taryn agrees. Lady Marin is the only council member defending you, and even she thinks you're reckless." Elara's hands clenched into fists. "So you're sending me home?" "I didn't say that." Kyle stopped a few feet away, studying her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Tell me something. In that evaluation today, did you actually believe your solution would work, or were you just trying to prove a point?" "I believed it would work. I still do. Even though it would cost a fortune and turn the noble houses against the crown?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because 500 lives matter. Because if we start calculating human worth in silver, we've already lost whatever humanity we claim to be protecting." Elara met his eyes. "You asked me to help tear down a corrupt system. That system includes the idea that noble wealth is more sacred than common lives." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the slight, controlled expression from last night, but a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can't I be both?" "Apparently." He returned to the table, pulling out a different map, the Southern Mining District. "Your solution was actually the best one proposed. Master Aldrich agreed, so did Lady Marin, though she won't say so publicly." Hope sparked in Elara's chest. "You're going to implement it?" "I'm considering it. But if I do, it won't be because of the selection evaluation. It'll be because it's the right strategic choice." He traced the mining routes with one finger. "And because I'm tired of sacrificing people to maintain a status quo that only benefits those already in power." "Then do it. Prove the system can change." Kale looked at her, something complicated in his expression. "You realize if I do this, the nobles will blame you. They'll see you as the influence that turned me against them. It will make you even more of a target." "I'm already a target." "Not like this. This would make you the symbol of everything they fear, a commoner with the king's ear, advocating for policies that threaten their wealth." He moved closer. "They'll come for you, Elara. Not physically, perhaps, but they'll destroy your reputation, your credibility. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made and parade it through the court. Let them. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide." Elara thought of her mother, of the quiet shame that had followed them for years, of the neighbors who'd whispered about the discarded royal mistress and her illegitimate daughter. "Then they'll find out I'm the daughter of a woman your father used and threw away. They'll call me tainted bloodlines, unsuitable, a reminder of royal mistakes." She lifted her chin. "I already know what I am. They can't hurt me with the truth." Mikhail's expression shifted, respect, admiration, and something else she couldn't identify. "You're extraordinary." "I'm just someone who's tired of watching people suffer while those in power debate the cost of caring." "That's what makes you extraordinary." He was very close now, close enough that she could see the gray flecks in his storm-colored eyes. "Most people in your position would be fighting for personal advancement. You're fighting for strangers. Maybe I just remember what it's like to be a stranger everyone ignores." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Then Kael stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "The selection continues. Duke Thorne's objections are noted but overruled. You stay." He moved to the door, then paused. "And Elara? That solution you proposed today? I'm implementing it tomorrow. The nobles can object all they want, but this is my kingdom, and those are my people dying in those mines." Elara's heart soared. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just be ready for the backlash." He opened the door, signaling the guard. "And for the sake of the kingdom, try not to insult any more dukes this week. I can only overrule so many execution requests. Execution. But Kael was already walking away, leaving Elara with the horrifying realization that he might not have been joking. She returned to her chambers to find Mira pacing anxiously. The moment she saw Elara, she practically tackled her. "Thank the skies you're alive. What happened?" "The king is implementing my plague solution. The nobles are going to be furious, and apparently Duke Thorn wants me dead." Elara sank into a chair, exhaustion finally hitting her. "Just another day in paradise." Mira stared at her. "You're insane." "So I've been told. But also amazing." Mira grinned. "You're actually changing things. Real things. Or getting myself killed trying." A sharp knock made them both jump. A servant entered, carrying a sealed letter on a silver tray. "For Miss Vance, marked urgent." The moment Elara saw the seal, Duke Thorn's family crest, her blood went cold. She broke the wax with trembling fingers and read, "Miss Vance, your insults to my family name will not be forgotten or forgiven. My daughter may be bound by selection rules, but I am not. Consider this your only warning. Withdraw from the selection, return to whatever gutter spawned you, or discover what happens to commoners who forget their place. Respectfully, Duke Thorn." The paper shook in Elara's hands. It wasn't even subtle, just a direct threat, delivered to her room like an invitation to tea. Mira read over her shoulder and gasped. "You have to show this to the king. This is witness intimidation, threatening a member of the selection. It's a piece of paper. No proof he sent it, and even if he didn't explicitly threaten violence." Elara crumpled the letter. "It's just designed to scare me." "Is it working?" Elara looked at her friend's terrified face, thought of Duke Thorn's power, of the man found dead in the river, of all the ways the system punished those who challenged it. "Yes," she admitted. "It's working. But I'm not leaving." "Why not? What's worth dying for?" Elara thought of her mother's hollow eyes, of the 500 miners dying while nobles calculated profit margins, of all the women throughout history who'd been selected and used and discarded without anyone caring enough to stop it. "Because someone has to," she said quietly. "Someone has to stand up and say this isn't right. And if it's me, if I'm the one who ends up dead in the river because I couldn't keep my mouth shut, at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have mattered." Mira pulled her into a fierce hug. "Then I'm staying too. You're not doing this alone." "Mira, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because you're right. Someone has to. And if it's going to be you, you'll need someone to watch your back." They held each other in the candlelight, two women in a palace full of predators, making promises they might not be able to keep. Somewhere in the palace, Duke Thorn was plotting. Somewhere, Cassandra was sharpening her knives. And somewhere, the Alpha King was making decisions that would ripple through the entire kingdom. But in that moment, Elara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, she could actually win this. The thought terrified her more than any threat. The hope didn't last through the night. Elara woke to screaming, raw, terrified sounds that cut through the pre-dawn darkness like shattered glass. She bolted upright, heart hammering, as footsteps thundered past her door. Mira was already awake, pressed against the far wall, her face pale in the dim light. "What's happening?" Elara whispered. Before Mira could answer, their door burst open. A guard stood in the hallway, his expression grim. "All women of the selection are to report to the throne hall immediately, no exceptions." They dressed in minutes, fingers fumbling with laces and buttons. The corridors were chaos, servants rushing with blankets and medical supplies, guards shouting orders, and everywhere the acrid smell of smoke. When they reached the throne hall, the other women were already gathering, some still in nightgowns, all looking terrified. Cassandra stood near the front, perfectly composed despite the emergency, her hair already arranged and her dress immaculate. She caught Elara's eye and smiled, a predator's smile that made Elara's stomach drop. Kael entered through the private council entrance, followed by General Voss and Lord Terran. The king's face was carved from ice, but beneath it Elara could see fury burning like coals. "Last night," Kael announced, his voice cutting through the frightened whispers, "someone set fire to the East Wing medical storage. 3 servants were injured trying to contain it. All medical supplies intended for the southern mining district were destroyed." Gasps rippled through the assembled women. Elara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Those supplies, they were supposed to ship out today, part of the implementation of her plague solution. Without them, the miners would die. This was not an accident, General Voss added, his scarred face hard as granite. Accelerant was used, multiple ignition points. This was deliberate sabotage. Who would do such a thing? One of the women cried out. Lord Terran stepped forward, and the expression on his face made Elara's blood freeze. We have a witness, a servant who saw someone fleeing the scene shortly before the fire started. He paused, his eyes finding Elara with unmistakable satisfaction. Miss Elara Vance. The hall erupted. That's impossible, Elara heard herself say, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Women were shouting, guards moving forward, and Cassandra's smile had grown sharp enough to cut bone. Liar! Mira screamed, pushing forward. Elara was in her room all night, I can testify. You share adjacent rooms, Lord Terran interrupted smoothly. Your testimony is compromised by friendship. The servant, however, has no reason to lie. She identified Miss Vance by her distinctive clothing, the plain blue dress she wore yesterday, and by her limp. I don't limp anymore, Elara said, forcing herself to speak calmly, despite the panic clawing at her throat. You all know that. The king exposed it as a performance. Yet, habits are hard to break, Cassandra interjected, her voice sweet poison. And who better to sabotage the medical supplies than the person whose proposal required them? If the plan fails due to lack of resources, you can't be blamed for its failure. How convenient. That's insane, Elara snapped. Why would I destroy the very thing I fought for? Perhaps you realized your solution was impossible, Lord Terran suggested. Perhaps you sought to avoid the embarrassment of its inevitable collapse. Or perhaps, his smile turned vicious, you're working with outside interests who don't want the mines saved. What outside interests? What are you talking about? Duke Thorn owns the competing silver mines in the Western Territory, Kale said quietly, and every head turned toward him. If the southern mines fail, his holdings become the kingdom's primary source of silver. He stands to gain a fortune. The implication hung in the air like a noose. You think I'm working for Duke Thorn? Elara's voice rose with incredulity. The man who threatened me yesterday? The father of the woman who's been trying to destroy me since I arrived? Threatened you? Lord Terran's eyebrows rose. Do you have evidence of this threat? Elara's mouth went dry. She'd destroyed the letter, crumpled it and thrown it in the fire, too angry to think about keeping evidence. I received a letter. Convenient that you have no proof, Cassandra said, while we have an eyewitness to your crime. This is a setup, Mira insisted. Can't you see? Someone's framing her. Enough. Kyle's single word silenced the hall. He descended from the dais slowly, his gaze fixed on Elara. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Miss Vance, do you deny being in the East Wing last night? I was in my room. I never left. Can anyone besides Miss Grain confirm this? Elara's mind raced. The truth was, she'd been alone after Mira left. No witnesses, no alibi, just her word against a servant she'd never met. No, but then you will be detained until this matter is investigated fully. Kale gestured to the guards. Take her to the holding chambers. No visitors, no exceptions. Your Majesty, please. Elara started forward, but two guards were already moving to flank her. This is wrong, Mira shouted. You know she didn't do this. Kale's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained cold. What I know is that 3 people were injured and critical supplies were destroyed. Until we determine the truth, Miss Vance remains in custody. Anyone who interferes will join her. The guards took Elara's arms. She didn't resist, there was no point. As they led her toward the side exit, she caught Cassandra's eye one last time. The blonde woman's smile was triumphant, absolutely radiant with victory. The holding chamber was exactly what it sounded like. A small stone room with a cot, a chamber pot, and a barred window too high to reach. The guards locked the door without a word, their footsteps echoing away down the corridor. Elara sank onto the cot, her mind spinning. This was a setup. Had to be. But who? Cassandra had the most obvious motive, removing her primary competition. Duke Thorn had reasons too, punishing her for the insults, protecting his financial interests. Or maybe it was Lord Terran, tired of having his authority challenged by a commoner. The real question was whether Kyle believed she was guilty. His face had given nothing away. That careful neutrality could mean he was protecting her by appearing impartial, or it could mean he'd already decided she was guilty and was just following procedure. After everything, the conversations, the shared purpose, the moment in the war room, was it possible he thought she'd betrayed him? The thought made her chest ache. Hours crawled past. The sun climbed higher, visible through the barred window as a square of pale light on the stone floor. No one came. No food, no water, no information. Just silence and her own spiraling thoughts. It was nearly dark when she heard footsteps approaching, multiple sets moving quickly. The lock turned and the door swung open. Lady Marin stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her were two guards. "Come with me," the older woman said curtly. "Where are we going?" "The king has summoned you. That's all you need to know." They led her through corridors she didn't recognize, deeper into the palace's administrative heart. Finally, they stopped outside a heavy oak door. Lady Marin knocked twice, then entered without waiting for permission. The room was a small council chamber. Cale sat at the head of a table covered with documents and maps. Master Aldrich stood to his right, General Voss to his left, and seated across from them, looking smug and dangerous, was Duke Thorne himself, a man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. "Miss Vance," Cale said without preamble, "we've been reviewing the evidence." Elara's heart hammered. "And?" "The servant who identified you has disappeared. Left the palace sometime this afternoon, destination unknown. Before she left, however, she deposited a significant sum of money with a merchant in the lower city, far more than a palace servant could earn honestly." Hope sparked in Elara's chest. Someone paid her to lie. "So it appears," Master Aldrich confirmed. "We're attempting to trace the funds, but it was done cleverly. Multiple intermediaries, dead drops, untraceable exchanges." Duke Thorne leaned back in his chair, radiating arrogance. "This proves nothing except that the girl got nervous and fled. Perhaps Miss Vance paid her to provide the initial false testimony, then paid her again to disappear when the investigation intensified." "That's ridiculous," Elara snapped. "I don't have that kind of money, and you know it." "Do I? Perhaps you have wealthy benefactors. Perhaps someone who wants the Southern mines to fail." His smile was sharp. "Someone like the Eastern Trading Consortium who profit when silver prices rise due to scarcity." Cale's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Duke Thorne. As serious as the accusations leveled against my daughter by this commoner, as serious as the insults to my family name, as serious as the sabotage that nearly killed 3 servants." Duke Thorne stood, his voice rising with carefully calculated outrage. "Your Majesty, I've been patient. I've tolerated this girl's presence despite her obvious unsuitability. But this has gone too far. She's a threat to the kingdom's stability, to the selection's integrity, and to the rule of law itself." "Your objection is noted," Kael said coolly. "I demand more than notation. I demand justice. Remove her from the selection, charge her formally with sabotage and conspiracy, and let the courts handle this properly." Duke Thorne's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. "Or do you intend to let your fascination with her defiance cloud your judgment as a ruler?" The implication hung in the air. That Kael's interest in Elara was personal, not political, that he was compromised. General Voss's hand moved to his sword. "You overstep, Duke." "Do I? Then prove me wrong. Apply the law equally, regardless of the accused's relationship with the crown." Duke Thorne looked directly at Elara, his eyes cold and empty. "Unless, of course, the king's new pet is above the law." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kael rose slowly, his face carved from marble. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "General Voss, arrest Duke Thorne." Everyone in the room froze. "Your Majesty?" Voss looked stunned. "You heard me. Arrest him. Charge him with conspiracy to commit sabotage, attempted murder, and witness tampering." Duke Thorne's face went purple. "This is outrageous. On what evidence?" "On the evidence that will be found when we thoroughly search your estates and question your staff. On the evidence that already exists showing your mine's profit from the Southern District's failure. On the evidence of your letter threatening Miss Vance." Cale pulled a document from the pile, "which she mentioned to Lady Marin yesterday evening, who logged it officially before the fire even occurred." Alara's head whipped toward Lady Marin, who stood impassively by the door. The older woman had been protecting her, documenting the threat even without the physical letter, building a case. "You can't do this," Duke Thorne snarled. "I have allies on the council, in the noble houses." "You have accomplices," Cale corrected, "and we'll find them all." "General?" Voss moved forward, two guards materializing behind him. Duke Thorne backed away, his arrogance crumbling into genuine fear. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "The noble houses will never forgive this. You're choosing a commoner over the foundations of your own power. I'm choosing law over corruption. There's a difference." Cale's eyes were winter storms. "Take him to the tower. Maximum security. No visitors without my direct authorization." As the guard seized Duke Thorne, dragging him toward the door, he twisted back toward Elara. "This isn't over, girl. My daughter still stands in the selection. My allies still hold power. You've won nothing but a temporary reprieve." The door slammed shut on his threats. The room exhaled collectively. Master Aldrich sank into a chair, looking decades older. Lady Marin's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and Cale remained standing, his hands pressed flat against the table, breathing hard. "Your Majesty," Master Aldrich said carefully, "you realize what you've just done." "I'm aware." "The noble houses will view this as an attack on their autonomy. Duke Thorne wasn't just accused, he was arrested in front of witnesses, dragged away like a common criminal. They'll demand explanations, assurances. Then they'll get the truth." Cale straightened, his jaw set. Duke Thorne paid a servant to lie, destroyed critical medical supplies, and attempted to frame an innocent woman for his crimes. If the noble houses defend that, they're complicit. And if they rebel, then we deal with it. Cale's gaze found Elara. "But I won't sacrifice innocent people to maintain a corrupt peace. Not anymore." Lady Marin cleared her throat. "The question remains, who set the fire? If Duke Thorne paid the servant to lie about seeing Miss Vance, someone else must have done the actual deed. Someone with access to the palace," General Voss added. "Someone who knew where the supplies were stored and when the guards rotated shifts." The implications were chilling. A traitor inside the palace. Someone close enough to move freely, trusted enough to avoid suspicion. "We'll investigate," Cale said. "Quietly. In the meantime, Miss Vance, you're cleared of all charges. You may return to the selection." Elara should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "The other women will never accept me now. They'll think I was protected because I arrested a duke who tried to have you framed?" Cale's expression was unreadable. "Let them think what they want. The truth is on record. The truth won't matter to them. They'll see favoritism, special treatment. It'll make everything worse. Then prove them wrong." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "You wanted to change the system. This is what change looks like. Messy, dangerous, and absolutely worth fighting for." Before Elara could respond, the door burst open. A young guard stumbled in, his face ashen. "Your Majesty, there's been an incident in the selection wing." They ran. The selection wing was in chaos, women screaming, servants rushing with water and blankets, and smoke, so much smoke, pouring from one of the chambers. Elara's heart stopped when she realized which one. Mira's room. She shoved past the guards, ignoring Kael's shout of warning, and burst through the door. The room was filled with acrid smoke, flames licking up one wall. And in the center, collapsed on the floor, was Mira. Elara grabbed her friend's arms and dragged her toward the hallway, coughing violently as smoke filled her lungs. Hands appeared, guards pulling them both out, carrying Mira's limp form to safety. "Get a physician!" someone shouted. Elara knelt beside Mira on the corridor floor, her hands shaking as she checked for breathing. There, weak but present. Mira's face was pale, her lips tinged blue from smoke inhalation. "Move aside," Lady Marin commanded, dropping to her knees with a medical kit. She worked quickly, checking Mira's pulse, lifting her eyelids, listening to her breathing. "She'll live, but she needs proper care. Get her to the infirmary immediately." As guards lifted Mira onto a stretcher, Elara caught her friend's hand. "I'm here. You're going to be fine." Mira's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. Her lips moved, barely whispering. "Warned me. Told me to stay away from you, or this would happen." "Who? Mira? Who warned you? But her friend's eyes had already closed again, consciousness slipping away. Kale appeared at Elara's side, his face grim. General Voss is examining the room. Initial assessment. Another deliberate fire. Accelerant used. Ignition point near the bed. They tried to kill her. Elara's voice shook with fury and horror. Because she defended me, because she was my friend. We don't know that for certain. Yes, we do. Elara stood, her fists clenched. First, they framed me for sabotage. When that failed, they went after the person closest to me. This is a message. Then we need to find who sent it before they try again. General Voss emerged from the smoke-damaged room, carrying something wrapped in cloth. Your Majesty, you need to see this. He unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a partially burned letter. The seal was still visible, not Duke Thorne's crest. This one was different, familiar. Lady Marin gasped. That's Lord Terran's seal. The letter was fragmentary, edges charred away, but enough remained to read, eliminate the threat, make it look accidental. No connection to the family. Kael's expression went absolutely cold. Find Lord Terran, now! Guards scattered, but Elara's mind was racing ahead, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. It wasn't just Duke Thorne. They were working together, Thorne providing money and motivation, Terran providing inside access and planning. But why? Master Aldrich looked bewildered. What does Terran gain from sabotaging the medical supplies or attacking Miss Grain? Chaos, Lady Marin said quietly. Instability in the selection. Proof that the king's judgment is compromised, that his reforms are causing violence and disorder. She looked at Kael. They wanted to force you to choose, abandon your changes and maintain peace, or continue and watch the kingdom descend into civil conflict. They underestimated me, Kael said flatly, and they hurt innocent people doing it. A guard returned, breathing hard. Your Majesty, Lord Terran is gone. His chambers are empty, his personal effects cleared out. One of the stable masters reports a horse missing, taken sometime after Duke Thorne's arrest. He ran, Elara breathed. He knew we'd find the evidence, and he fled. Send riders in all directions, Kael commanded. Check the ports, the border crossings, every route out of the capital. I want him found and brought back to stand trial. As guards rushed to obey, Cassandra emerged from the crowd of gathered women. Her face was pale, her usual composure fractured. Your Majesty, my father, is it true? Did he really? Your father is under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder, Kael said without softening the blow. Lord Terran was his accomplice. We have evidence. Cassandra swayed slightly, and for a moment Elara almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then the blonde woman's eyes hardened, focusing on Elara with pure venom. This is your fault, she hissed. Everything was fine until you arrived with your common blood and your righteous speeches. Now my father is in chains and the entire selection is falling apart. Your father committed crimes, Elara cut her off. Don't blame me for his choices. He was protecting our interests, the natural order of things. You're trying to tear down centuries of tradition because you can't accept your place. My place? Elara stepped forward, anger burning through her exhaustion. My place is wherever I choose to stand, just like yours. The only difference is I'm not hiding behind bloodlines and privilege to justify my existence. Cassandra raised her hand as if to strike, but Kael's voice cracked like a whip. Enough! Lady Cassandra, you're confined to your quarters pending investigation. If you had any knowledge of your father's plans, I knew nothing. Tears streamed down Cassandra's face now, her mask completely shattered. I just wanted to win fairly, to prove I was worthy without his interference. She looked at Elara, and for the first time there was something raw and honest in her expression. I hated you, but I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. Guards escorted her away, still crying. The other women of the selection watched in stunned silence, their dreams of a prestigious competition transformed overnight into a nightmare of conspiracy and violence. Kael addressed them all, his voice carrying absolute authority. The selection is suspended until further notice. You will remain in this palace for your own protection while we investigate the full extent of this conspiracy. Anyone who wishes to withdraw may do so without penalty. For those who stay, understand this. The system you thought you understood is being rebuilt from the ground up. If that frightens you, leave now. No one moved. Whether from fear, ambition, or simple shock, every woman stayed rooted in place. Good. Return to your chambers. Guards will be posted for your safety. Anyone attempting to leave the wing without authorization will be detained. He turned to General Voss. I want a full security review. Every person with access to the selection wing, every schedule, every unusual occurrence in the past week. Someone inside helped Terran. Find them. As the crowd dispersed, Elara remained standing in the smoke-stained hallway, her mind numb with exhaustion and shock. Mira was alive but injured. Duke Thorn was in chains. Lord Terran had fled. And somewhere in the palace, another conspirator was still hiding. Kael appeared at her side. Come with me. They walked in silence to his private study. Once inside, he poured 2 glasses of wine with shaking hands, the first sign of anything but perfect control she'd seen from him. Drink, he ordered. Elara drank. The wine burned down her throat, grounding her back and her body. I'm sorry, Kael said quietly. For what? For bringing you into this, for making you a target, for not protecting you better. He set down his glass, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. You were right to try to disappear. This world destroys people like you, people who are honest and brave and refuse to bend. I'm not destroyed yet. But you could have been. Mira could have died because of her friendship with you. Duke Thorn wanted you discredited and imprisoned. Terran wanted you dead, and He stopped, turning away. I used you. I saw your defiance and your anger, and I weaponized it for my own political purposes. I'm no better than they are. Elara stood, crossing to him. That's not true. Isn't it? I kept you in the selection knowing it would paint a target on your back. I implemented your policies knowing the nobles would blame you. I arrested Duke Thorn publicly, which makes you the visible cause of a duke's downfall. His voice cracked slightly. I turned you into exactly what they accused you of being, a threat to the established order. Good, Elara said firmly, because that order deserves to be threatened. It deserves to be torn down and rebuilt into something that doesn't sacrifice innocent people for power and profit. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. You didn't use me, Kael. We're using each other. You need someone who can't be bought or intimidated, and I need someone with the authority to actually make changes. That's not exploitation, that's partnership. He looked at her with something like wonder. How are you not terrified right now? Oh, I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm absolutely terrified. But I'm also angry, and I've learned that anger is a better fuel than fear. Kael's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness. You're extraordinary, Elara Vance, and A thunderous knock interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. General Voss entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. We found something, he said, in Lord Terran's chambers. A complete record of the conspiracy, communications with Duke Thorn, payment ledgers, plans for multiple attacks. He paused. And a list of other nobles involved. Your Majesty, this goes deeper than we thought. 6 more families, all coordinating to destabilize your reforms and discredit Miss Vance. Kael's expression went utterly cold. Names. Voss handed him the document. As Kael read, his face became a mask of controlled fury. Half of these are on my council. 2 are generals in my army. This isn't a conspiracy. This is the beginning of a coup. Or the end of one, Elara said quietly. They tried to stop your reforms before they could take root. They failed. Now they're exposed. Which makes them desperate, Kael countered. And desperate nobles with armies are dangerous. He looked at Voss. How many loyal troops do we have in the capital? 4 regiments. Maybe 5 if Colonel Thrace proves trustworthy. Not enough if the conspirators combine their forces. Kael's mind was clearly racing, calculating odds and strategies. We need to move first, arrest them all simultaneously before they can coordinate a response. That's a mass arrest of nobility, Master Aldrich said from the doorway. Apparently he'd followed Voss. The precedent alone is necessary. Kael's voice was iron. They committed treason. The law is clear. The law is clear, but the political reality is chaos, Aldrich pressed. If you arrest this many nobles at once, Their families will cry tyranny. Other houses will take sides. We could be looking at civil war. Then we prevent it with overwhelming force and irrefutable evidence. Kale turned to Elara. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency session of the full council. Every noble house, every military commander, every person of power in this kingdom. I'm going to present the evidence of this conspiracy publicly and arrest everyone involved. He paused. And I want you there, standing beside me, visible proof that their plot failed and that the reforms continue. Elara's heart skipped. They'll see that as confirmation of their worst fears, that I have undue influence over you. Let them, because after tomorrow, their fears will be irrelevant. They'll be in chains or in exile and their power will be broken. His eyes held hers. But I won't do this without your consent. If you stand with me tomorrow, you become the symbol of everything they fought against. You'll be cementing yourself as an enemy of the old guard forever. And if I refuse, then I do it alone, and you stay safe. No more targets, no more attacks. You can withdraw from the selection, return home, live in peace. It was the same choice he'd offered days ago, safety in obscurity or danger in significance. Only this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. This wasn't about one woman in a selection. This was about the future of the entire kingdom. Elara thought of Mira, lying unconscious in the infirmary because she'd been Elara's friend. She thought of the miners dying in the south because medical supplies had been destroyed. She thought of her mother, hollowed out by a system that had used and discarded her without a second thought. And she thought of all the people throughout history who'd had the chance to stand up and had chosen silence instead. I'll stand with you, she said, whatever happens. Kael's expression shifted, relief, gratitude, and something deeper that made her breath catch. Then tomorrow, we change everything. He was right about that, though not in the way either of them expected. The emergency council session was held in the Great Hall, a vast chamber designed to hold hundreds. Every noble house had sent representatives. Every military commander was present. The air crackled with tension and confusion. No one knew why they'd been summoned, but the rumors were already flying. Duke Thorne's arrest, Lord Terran's flight, whispers of conspiracy and treason. Elara stood on the dais beside Kael's throne, her plain dress a stark contrast to the sea of silk and jewels below. She could feel every eye on her, every judgment, every calculation. Kael rose, and silence fell like a blade. Thank you for attending on such short notice, he began, his voice carrying to every corner. I've called you here to address a matter of utmost urgency, a conspiracy against the crown, against the kingdom's stability, and against the very foundations of law and order that bind us together. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Over the past week, multiple attacks have been carried out within the palace. Medical supplies destroyed. Innocent servants injured. A woman of the selection nearly killed in her chambers. These were not random acts of violence. They were coordinated attacks designed to undermine the crown's authority and halt necessary reforms. The murmurs grew louder. Elara scanned the crowd, watching faces, shock, confusion, and on several faces barely concealed fear. We have evidence, Kael continued, linking these attacks to a conspiracy led by Duke Thorne and Lord Terran, but including several other noble houses. He gestured to General Voss, who began reading names from the document. With each name, gasps erupted. Some of the accused stood, shouting denials. Others sat frozen, knowing they were caught. General Voss, Kael commanded, arrest everyone on that list. Guards moved through the crowd, seizing nobles who'd entered the hall as guests and would leave as prisoners. The chamber erupted into chaos, families screaming protests, allies demanding explanations, neutral parties backing away from the accused as if treason were contagious. And then, cutting through the noise, a single voice rang out. This is tyranny. An older man stood in the center of the hall, Duke Morven, head of one of the oldest families in the kingdom. You arrest nobles on the word of a commoner girl? You dismantle centuries of tradition because one woman challenges your authority? This isn't justice, Your Majesty. This is a coup from within. Several nobles shouted agreement. The neutral families looked uncertain, swaying on the edge of choosing sides. Kael's voice cracked like thunder. I arrest traitors on the evidence of their own documentation. Lord Terran kept records, payment ledgers, communications, plans. Every accusation is backed by proof. If you doubt this, examine the evidence yourself. Evidence can be fabricated, Duke Morven countered, especially when it's convenient for the crown to eliminate opposition. Are you calling me a liar? Cale's tone dropped to something deadly. I'm calling this entire proceeding suspect, and I'm not alone. Duke Morven gestured broadly. Half the nobles in this room question your recent decisions. The sudden reforms, the elevation of commoners to positions of influence. His eyes cut to Elara. The selection itself becoming a political tool rather than a sacred tradition. We've remained silent out of respect for your authority, but this is too far. Then voice your concerns properly, through legal channels, Kale said, not through conspiracy and violence. We tried. Every reform we opposed, every concern we raised, you dismissed. You stopped listening to the council that's advised the throne for generations. You've isolated yourself with commoner yes-men and a girl who— Be very careful with your next words, Kyle warned, but Duke Morven had gone too far to stop now. She's poisoned you against your own people. This commoner with her convenient sob story and her manipulative innocence has turned you into a tyrant who arrests nobles for disagreeing with him. The hall erupted again, louder this time. Supporters and opponents shouting over each other, guards struggling to maintain order, the arrested nobles protesting their innocence while their families demanded their release. Elara watched it spiral out of control, watched the kingdom tearing itself apart in real time, and realized with cold clarity that Duke Morven was winning. He'd reframed the entire narrative. This wasn't about stopping a conspiracy, it was about a king gone mad with power under the influence of a commoner seductress, and standing silent while it happened would only confirm that narrative. She stepped forward, directly to the edge of the dais, and spoke. Her voice wasn't as powerful as Kael's, but something in her tone cut through the chaos. You want to blame me? Fine. Blame me. The shouting died down as people strained to hear. Blame me for exposing corruption in the selection process. Blame me for proposing a solution that would save lives instead of sacrificing them for profit. Blame me for refusing to stay silent while people in power abuse that power. Her voice rose, filling the hall. But understand this. I didn't poison the king. I didn't manipulate him. I simply told the truth, and he chose to listen. If that makes him a tyrant in your eyes, then you've never understood what real tyranny looks like. You're a commoner, someone shouted. You have no right. I have every right that any person has. The right to speak, to question, to demand better from those who claim to lead us. Elara's hands clenched into fists. And if my common blood makes my words less valuable than yours, then this kingdom deserves to fall. The silence that followed was absolute. Duke Morven's face was purple with rage. You dare! She dares because she's right, a new voice interrupted. Lady Marin stepped forward from where she'd been standing to the side, her expression carved from ice. I've served this kingdom for 40 years. I've watched kings rise and fall, seen reforms succeed and fail, and witnessed more corruption than anyone in this room wants to acknowledge. She looked directly at Duke Morven. Miss Vance spoke truth. The selection is corrupt. The noble houses do abuse their power. And yes, some of you did conspire against the crown because you were more concerned with protecting your wealth than serving your kingdom. You're defending her because I've examined the evidence and it's damning, Lady Marin cut him off. Every accusation is documented. Every arrest is justified. And if you had any integrity left, Duke Morven, you'd acknowledge that instead of spinning conspiracy theories. Master Aldrich stepped forward as well. The historical record will show that these reforms were necessary and lawful. Opposition is expected. Conspiracy and violence are not. One by one, other council members who'd remained neutral began stepping forward, choosing sides. Not all sided with Kael. Several declared their support for Duke Morven's concerns, calling for an independent investigation. But enough supported the king to shift the balance. Duke Morven saw his support fracturing and made his final desperate play. Then let's test this girl's influence, he declared. Let the king prove she hasn't compromised his judgment. Remove her from the selection. Send her away. Show us that you can rule without her whispering in your ear. Every eye turned to Kael. This was the trap. If he removed Elara, he proved Duke Morven right, that she was expendable, that her influence was inappropriate. that his reforms were built on personal feelings rather than principle. If he kept her, he confirmed every accusation of favoritism and bias. Elara felt her heart breaking even before Kael spoke. "No," he said quietly. The hall erupted again, but Kael's voice cut through it. "I will not remove Miss Vance from the selection because she's done nothing wrong. I will not sacrifice an innocent woman to appease nobles who attempted treason. And I will not allow threats and ultimatums to dictate crown policy." Duke Morven smiled, a predator's smile. "Then you leave us no choice, Your Majesty. We invoke the Council's right of challenge." Gasps rippled through the hall. Even Lady Marin looked shocked. Master Aldrich stepped forward, his face pale. "Your Grace, that right hasn't been invoked in over a century." "But it exists," Duke Morven interrupted. "When a king's judgment is called into question, the council may demand proof of his fitness to rule. Trial by ordeal. The king must face a challenge that demonstrates his wisdom, his strength, and his commitment to the kingdom above all personal interests." "This is absurd," General Voss growled. "This is law," Duke Morven countered. "Ancient law, written into the very founding documents of this kingdom. Unless His Majesty wishes to refuse, which would automatically forfeit the throne to the council's chosen regent. It was a perfect trap. Accept the challenge and be forced into some humiliating ordeal designed to prove his enemies right. Refuse and lose the throne entirely." Kael's face was absolutely expressionless. "What ordeal do you propose?" Duke Morven's smile widened. "Simple. Choose a mate from the selection by dawn tomorrow. Make your choice based on wisdom and political alliance, proving you can put the kingdom's needs above personal preference. But," he paused dramatically, "you may not choose Elara Vance." The hall fell silent. It was brilliant, cruel, brilliant, and absolutely devastating. If Kael chose someone else, he proved Elara was expendable and his reforms were negotiable. If he refused to choose, he lost the throne. And if he chose Elara anyway, he violated the challenge's terms and proved Duke Morven's accusations of compromised judgment. Elara felt the floor tilting beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. "And if I meet this challenge," Kael asked, his voice deadly calm, "then we accept your judgment on the arrests and the reforms. The conspiracy charge stands, and we move forward under your continued rule." Duke Morven spread his hands magnanimously. "We simply want proof that you can lead with wisdom rather than distraction." "Your Majesty, you don't have to agree to this," Lady Marin interjected. "The right of challenge is archaic, legally questionable in modern context, but still valid," Master Aldrich said reluctantly. "If challenged formally before the full council, the king must either accept or abdicate." Kael looked at Elara for the first time since Duke Morven had made his proposal. His eyes held 1,000 apologies, 1,000 regrets, and beneath it all, a question. "What do I do?" Elara wanted to scream, wanted to tear down the walls and burn the whole corrupt system to ashes. But she knew the answer, had known it the moment Duke Morven spoke. She gave the smallest nod. "Do what you have to do. Save the kingdom. I'll survive." Kael's jaw tightened. When he turned back to Duke Morven, his voice was absolutely cold. "I accept your challenge." The hall erupted in chaos again, but Elara barely heard it. Her vision had tunneled down to a single point of agonizing clarity. She'd fought so hard to avoid being chosen, had risked everything to stay visible and defiant and free. And now she was about to watch the man she'd come to care for, the man she'd started to trust, started to believe in, choose someone else. Not because he wanted to, but because her enemies had given him no other option. As guards moved to escort her from the dais, as the council dissolved into frantic negotiation about the challenge's exact terms, Elara caught Kael's eye one last time. He mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." She turned away before he could see her break. The guards didn't escort her back to the selection wing. Instead, they led her to a different part of the palace. Smaller chambers, plainer, away from the other women. Quarantine, she realized. They were isolating her to prevent her from influencing Kael's choice or rallying support among the remaining candidates. Fine. Let them isolate her. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. She could do it again, except this time, invisibility felt like suffocation. The chamber door locked behind her with a sound like finality. Elara stood in the center of the small room, her mind replaying the scene in the great hall over and over. Duke Morven's trap, Kael's impossible choice, her own nod that had sealed her fate. She'd told him to do what he had to do, told him to save the kingdom, and he would. He'd choose some politically advantageous noblewoman, maybe even Cassandra, if Duke Thorne's arrest hadn't completely destroyed her family's standing, and Elara would be sent home. The commoner who'd briefly captured a king's attention before reality reasserted itself. The story would become a cautionary tale, a warning to other women who thought they could rise above their station. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold stone wall, focusing on the physical sensation to keep from spiraling. She would not cry, would not break, would not give them the satisfaction. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elara turned, expecting a guard with food or a servant with instructions. Instead, the door opened to reveal Lady Marin, carrying a tray with tea and bread, her expression unreadable as always. "May I come in?" Elara gestured wordlessly. What did it matter anymore? Lady Marin set the tray down and poured 2 cups with practiced efficiency. "You should eat something. You look like you're about to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not, but I admire the attempt." Lady Marin settled into a chair, sipping her tea calmly. "That was quite a performance in the Great Hall. Duke Morven won't forget it. He already won. The challenge, the terms, it's over." "Is it?" Lady Marin's eyebrow arched. "I thought you were smarter than that." Elara's head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Duke Morven made a critical error. He assumed you'd react like every other woman who's ever been passed over, with hurt pride and quiet acceptance." Lady Marin set down her cup. "But you're not like the others, are you? You don't want to be chosen. You never did." The words hit like cold water. Elara's mind stuttered, then raced ahead. "I don't want to be chosen," she repeated slowly. "Exactly. So Duke Morven's trap only works if you care about being selected as the king's mate. If your goal was always to escape this system, then him forbidding the king from choosing you is," Lady Marin smiled faintly, "exactly what you wanted in the first place." Elara sank into the opposite chair, her thoughts realigning. "But Kael still has to choose someone. And whoever he chooses will influence his policies, his reforms. Will she?" Lady Marin leaned forward. "Or will she simply be a political figurehead while the real work continues? Think, Elara, the king doesn't need a mate to implement reforms. He needs loyal advisors, competent administrators, and public support. You've helped him secure all 3. By becoming the lightning rod that drew out his enemies." "Precisely. Duke Thorne, Lord Terran, and 6 other conspirators are now exposed and arrested. The nobles who supported them have been identified. The neutral houses have been forced to choose sides, and most chose the king. Duke Morven's challenge was a desperate attempt to salvage power from a losing position." Elara's pulse quickened. "But he succeeded. Kael has to choose someone else, prove his judgment isn't compromised. He has to appear to choose based on political wisdom rather than personal preference." Lady Marin corrected. "That's not the same thing as actually doing so." She paused. "Tell me, if you were the king, faced with this challenge, what would you do?" Elara's mind raced through possibilities. Choose the most politically advantageous candidate to satisfy the nobles. Choose the least threatening candidate to maintain control. Choose someone he could manipulate, or... "I'd change the game," Elara said slowly. "I'd find a way to meet the challenge's terms while completely undermining its purpose." Lady Marin's smile widened. "Now you're thinking like someone who belongs in power." "But I don't belong in power. I'm not noble, not educated in governance, not... You're the daughter of a royal mistress, which technically makes you part of the extended royal bloodline. Minor, yes, but legitimate enough to hold advisory positions." Lady Marin's eyes glinted. "And you've demonstrated more political acumen in 4 days than most nobles develop in a lifetime. You identified corruption, exposed conspiracies, and rallied public sentiment, all while pretending to be helpless." "I wasn't pretending. I am helpless. Duke Morven just proved it." "Did he? Or did he hand you the perfect opportunity to reshape this entire system?" Lady Marin stood, moving to the window. "The king cannot choose you as his mate. Fine. But there's no rule saying you can't serve the kingdom in other capacities. Chief Advisor, Master of Reforms, Royal Advocate for Common Interests. None of those positions require marriage or selection. Elara's heart was pounding now. You're suggesting I stay, not as a candidate, but as what you've already become, the king's partner in tearing down a corrupt system and building something better. Lady Marin turned back to face her. The selection was never the point, Elara. It was just the arena where the real battle was fought, and you're winning that battle. It doesn't feel like winning, because you're measuring victory by the wrong metric. You wanted to escape the selection. You've escaped. Duke Morven guaranteed it by forbidding the king from choosing you. You wanted to expose corruption. You've exposed an entire conspiracy network. You wanted to change the system. The king is literally arresting nobles and implementing your reforms. Lady Marin's voice softened slightly. The only loss here is a romantic fantasy that was never realistic to begin with. The words stung because they were true. Elara had never actually believed she could be with Kael. Not really. Kings didn't end up with commoners in real life. That was children's stories and fairy tales. But somewhere between the confrontations and the conversations, she'd started hoping anyway. And hope, she was learning, could hurt worse than fear. What do I do now? She asked quietly. You survive the next 20 hours. You let the king handle the challenge his way. And when dawn comes and he's made his choice, you decide whether you're willing to stay and fight for this kingdom even without the crown. Lady Marin moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated. She left before Elara could ask what she meant. Sleep was impossible. Elara paced the small chamber as the sun set and darkness filled the window. Somewhere in the palace, Kael was meeting with the remaining selection candidates, evaluating his options, preparing to make a choice that would satisfy Duke Morven's challenge while salvaging what he could of his authority. She wondered who he'd choose. Probably someone from a powerful neutral house, a gesture of reconciliation that would strengthen his coalition without rewarding the conspirators. Someone smart enough to be useful, but not threatening enough to challenge his authority. Someone beautiful enough to satisfy tradition, but politically savvy enough to understand her role was largely ceremonial. Someone who wasn't Elara. The thought shouldn't hurt as much as it did. A noise at the window made her freeze, a soft scraping, like something climbing the exterior wall. Elara backed away, searching for a weapon, her mind flashing to assassins and conspirators, and a dozen ways this could go wrong. The window swung open. A figure in dark clothing slipped through with practiced ease, landing silently on the chamber floor. Elara grabbed the tea tray, ready to throw it, when the figure pulled back their hood. Mira. What are you doing? Elara hissed. You're supposed to be in the infirmary. I discharged myself. Mira was pale, her movements careful, but her eyes blazed with determination. And I climbed 3 stories to get here because the guards wouldn't let me through the door. You're welcome. You could have fallen, but I didn't. Now stop scolding me and listen. Mira crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. The other women are talking. Word spread about the challenge, about Duke Morven's terms. Do you know what they're saying? That I got what I deserved? That the king's moving on to someone suitable? No, they're saying Duke Morven's terrified of you. Mira's voice rose with excitement. Think about it. He didn't demand the king choose quickly because he wanted resolution. He demanded it because he's afraid if there's time for debate, people will realize how absurd this whole challenge is. You've done nothing wrong, Elara. The only evidence of your undue influence is that the king listened to you, which apparently is a crime when you're common-born. It doesn't matter what's fair. The challenge stands. It matters because people are starting to see through it. Rhea and Serena have been talking to the other candidates, the ones who aren't allied with Cassandra, and they're furious. Not at you, at Duke Morven. He basically announced that common-born people aren't allowed to advise the king, which affects a lot of families who aren't noble but have members in government positions. Elara's mind caught on the implications. He overreached. Massively. And Lady Marin's been spreading the word about the evidence against the conspirators, actual documentation, not just accusations. The neutral nobles are realizing Duke Morven was part of the conspiracy, just smart enough not to get caught in the initial arrests. Mira's grip tightened. The political wind is shifting. If the king can just hold out until dawn, Duke Morven's coalition might collapse on its own, but he still has to choose someone. That's the challenge. Then maybe he chooses someone unexpected, someone who makes a statement. Mira's eyes gleamed. Someone who completely undermines what Duke Morven was trying to accomplish. Before Elara could ask what she meant, voices echoed in the hallway outside. Both women froze. Absolute disaster, Your Majesty. You cannot seriously be considering this. That was Master Aldrich, sounding more agitated than Elara had ever heard him. I'm not considering it. I've decided. Kael's voice flat and final. It violates every precedent, every tradition. Good. Those precedents need violating. The voices moved past, fading down the corridor. Mira and Elara exchanged looks. What do you think he's decided? Mira whispered. I don't know, but Aldrich sounds horrified, which means it's either brilliant or insane. With Kael, it's usually both. A different sound made them turn, the door lock clicking open. Both women tensed, but it was only a servant, a young girl who looked terrified to be there. Miss Vance? His Majesty requests your presence. Immediately. Elara's stomach dropped. Where? The king's private chambers, miss. Mira's eyebrows shot up. Elara's heart hammered. This was either very good or catastrophically bad. I'll go back through the window, Mira whispered. Good luck. She slipped out the way she'd come, disappearing into the night with the kind of reckless courage that had made them friends in the first place. Elara followed the servant through empty corridors, her mind spinning with possibilities. Why would Kael summon her hours before he had to make his choice? To explain his decision? To say goodbye? The servant stopped outside a heavy oak door, knocked twice, and fled before anyone answered. Come in, Kael's voice called. Elara pushed open this door and stepped into a room she'd never seen before. His actual private chambers, not the study or war room, but the personal space where he lived. It was surprisingly sparse, a large bed, a desk covered in papers, shelves of books, and weapons displayed on the walls like art. No excess, no luxury, just function and efficiency. Kael stood by the window, still in his formal council robes, staring out at the city below. He didn't turn when she entered. You asked for me? Elara said quietly. I did. He was silent for a moment. I'm about to do something incredibly stupid. That seems to be a pattern with us. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Not cold, not controlled, but burning with something fierce and desperate. Duke Morven's challenge requires me to choose a mate by dawn, to prove my judgment isn't compromised by personal preference. I know. Bow. So I'm going to choose the most politically advantageous candidate, the one who strengthens alliances, satisfies tradition, and proves I can put the kingdom first. He moved closer. I'm choosing Lady Cassandra Thorne. Elara felt like she'd been punched. What? Her father's in chains for conspiracy. Her family's reputation is destroyed. By choosing her anyway, I demonstrate mercy and political wisdom, showing that I judge individuals by their actions, not their bloodlines. His voice was clinical, detached, like he was discussing military strategy. It also neutralizes Duke Morven's objection that I'm biased against nobility. Cassandra is everything he claimed I should value: noble birth, proper education, political connections. She hates me, Elara managed. She's been trying to destroy me since I arrived. I know, which is why she'll accept the position. It gets her everything she wanted while humiliating you in the process. Perfect motivation for her to play her role convincingly. He paused. And it's a role, Elara. Nothing more. A political marriage that satisfies the challenge's requirements while changing absolutely nothing about how I actually govern. Elara's mind was reeling. You're using her. I'm giving her what she wants: status, power, proximity to the throne, in exchange for public support of my policies. That's not using her, that's negotiation. She gets to be queen. I get to continue reforming the kingdom. Everyone wins. Except me. No. Kael closed the distance between them, his voice dropping. Not except you, especially you, because Duke Morven's challenge forbids me from choosing you as my mate. It says nothing about appointing you to my council, nothing about creating a new position specifically designed to give voice to common interests. Nothing about making you the official liaison between the crown and the people. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear him. You want me to stay? I need you to stay, not as my mate. That was always impossible, we both knew it. But as my partner in actually changing this kingdom, Cassandra can be queen. You can be the person who makes sure that title means something more than a ceremonial prison. His hands came up to frame her face. I'm asking you to accept a position with no glory, no crown, and enemies around every corner. I'm asking you to fight this battle knowing you'll never get the fairy tale ending. But I'm asking because I can't do this without you. Elara searched his face, looking for manipulation, for political calculation, for any sign this was just another move in the endless game of power. But all she saw was raw honesty and desperate hope. Lady Marin already suggested something similar, she admitted. I thought she was offering me a consolation prize. She was offering you real power, the kind that actually changes lives instead of just decorating thrones. His thumb brushed her cheek. Say yes, Elara. Say you'll stay and help me tear down everything that's broken and build something better in its place. She should say no, should protect herself, go home, live a quiet life away from conspiracies and challenges and impossible choices. That was what she'd wanted from the beginning, but somewhere along the way her wants had changed. Yes, she whispered, I'll stay. Kale's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breath shuddering with relief. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, suspended in intimacy that would have to last them both. Because come dawn, he'd choose Cassandra publicly, and whatever this was between them would have to transform into something that fit within the rigid boundaries of court politics. I should go, Elara said, even though she didn't move. If anyone sees me here, let them see, let them talk. After tomorrow, they'll have plenty more to gossip about. But he released her anyway, stepping back to a professional distance. Get some rest. Dawn comes early, and you'll need your strength for what comes next. What comes next? He smiled, sharp and dangerous. Revolution. Dawn broke cold and clear. The great hall filled again, every noble house represented, every eye watching as Kael took his throne. The remaining women of the selection stood in a line before him, their faces reflecting varying degrees of hope, fear, and exhaustion. Cassandra stood at the front, perfectly composed in a gown of silver and blue. She'd agreed to Kyle's proposal in a private meeting Elara hadn't witnessed, and whatever he'd offered her had been enough. She looked every inch a future queen, beautiful, poised, and utterly confident. Elara stood to the side with the council members, no longer part of the selection, but not yet holding her new position. Invisible again, just like she'd wanted at the start, except this time she knew it was temporary. Duke Morven stood with his coalition, watching like a hawk for any sign Kael would violate the challenge's terms. Lord Terran had been captured overnight, dragged back to the capital in chains, one more piece of evidence that the conspiracy was real and documented. Kael rose. Silence fell. The challenge has been met. I have chosen my future queen based on political wisdom, not personal preference, demonstrating my fitness to rule. He gestured to Cassandra. Lady Cassandra Thorne, daughter of Duke Thorne, will become the Alpha Queen when we formalize our union. Cassandra stepped forward, curtsying perfectly. She looked triumphant, as if she'd won some grand competition. Maybe in her mind she had. Duke Morven inclined his head. A wise choice, Your Majesty. One that proves you can put the kingdom's needs first. I'm not finished, Kael's voice cut through the murmurs. The challenge required me to demonstrate wisdom in governance. So in addition to naming my future queen, I'm restructuring the royal council to better serve the kingdom's needs. Confusion rippled through the hall. This wasn't part of the challenge. Lady Marin will continue as Keeper of Bloodlines, Master Aldrich as Chief Historian, General Voss as Commander of the Royal Guard. He paused. And I'm creating a new position, Voice of the Commons, someone who represents the interests of common-born citizens in council proceedings, ensuring their concerns are heard at the highest levels of government. The hall erupted. Nobles shouting objections, common-born servants and guards looking shocked, neutral parties trying to process what this meant. Kael raised his hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried absolute authority. This position will have full voting rights on the council, Equal standing with noble representatives and direct access to the crown. The first person to hold this position will be Elara Vance. Elara felt every eye in the hall swing toward her. Shock, outrage, calculation, 1,000 reactions playing across hundreds of faces. Duke Morven's face turned purple. This is a violation of the challenge. You're elevating her to a position of power as a way around the restrictions. The challenge restricted my choice of mate, not my appointments to the council, Kyle interrupted coldly. Unless you're suggesting I'm forbidden from choosing qualified advisors based on their competence rather than their bloodlines. She's not qualified. She exposed a conspiracy your coalition was part of. She proposed the solution that's currently saving lives in the southern mines. She demonstrated more political acumen in 4 days than most of your allies have shown in decades. Kyle's voice was ice. If you want to argue she's unqualified, we can review the records publicly and compare her accomplishments to theirs. Duke Morven opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd been outmaneuvered and knew it. Lady Marin stepped forward. The position is legally sound. Historical precedent exists for advisors from common backgrounds. King Aldrich II appointed a merchant's son as master of trade. King Edric the Wise appointed a scholar with no noble blood as chief strategist. This is unusual, but not unprecedented. It's a mockery of tradition, someone shouted from Duke Morven's coalition. So was arresting nobles for crimes they actually committed, Kyle shot back. If you want to defend tradition over justice, make that argument publicly and see how the common people respond. The threat was clear. The nobles could object, but doing so would align them against the interests of common citizens, the majority of the kingdom's population. It was political suicide. Cassandra, still standing beside the throne, spoke for the first time. I support His Majesty's decision. Every head turned toward her. The kingdom needs reform. If appointing Miss Vance to the council helps achieve that, then as future queen, I endorse it. The calculation was obvious. Cassandra was positioning herself as a supporter of reform, distancing herself from her father's conspiracy, and securing her own power by aligning with the winning side. But it was also the final nail in Duke Morven's coffin. If even the chosen queen supported Elara's appointment, opposing it became impossible. Duke Morven knew when he'd lost. The challenge is satisfied, he said stiffly. I accept the king's choice of mate and his council appointments. It wasn't gracious, but it was surrender. Kyle nodded. Then this session is concluded. The arrests stand, the reforms continue, and the kingdom moves forward. Anyone who wishes to challenge these decisions may do so through proper legal channels. His eyes swept the hall. Anyone who attempts conspiracy, violence, or sabotage will face the full weight of the law. I trust that's clear. Silence. Then slowly, nobles began bowing and filing out. Some looked furious, some thoughtful, some simply relieved the crisis was over. The common-born guards and servants remained, many staring at Elara with something like awe. As the hall emptied, Cassandra approached Elara. Up close, her perfect composure showed cracks, exhaustion in her eyes, tension in her shoulders. I meant what I said, Cassandra told her quietly. I support your appointment. Why? You hate me. I did. Maybe I still do a little. Cassandra's smile was complicated. But I also respect you. You exposed my father's corruption, which means I don't have to spend the rest of my life wondering if my accomplishments are mine or bought with his dirty money. And you're right about the reforms. The system is broken. It needed someone willing to break with it. Your father tried to have me killed. I know, and I'll have to live with that shame forever. Cassandra's voice dropped. But I'm not him. I'm going to be queen, and I'm going to prove I deserve it through my actions, not my bloodline. Maybe we can't be friends, but we can be colleagues, partners in making sure this kingdom actually works. Elara studied her former enemy, seeing past the perfect exterior to the complicated woman beneath. Colleagues, she agreed carefully. We'll see about the rest. Cassandra nodded and withdrew, moving to where Master Aldrich was already explaining the protocols for formalizing a royal engagement. Lady Marin appeared at Elara's side. Well played. I didn't play anything. Kyle did this. You accepted. That's plain. Lady Marin's smile was almost warm. Welcome to the council, voice of the commons. Try not to let it kill you. Is that likely? Extremely. But you've survived this long. I have faith. As the older woman walked away, Mira rushed forward and threw her arms around Elara. You did it! You actually did it! Did what? I didn't get chosen, lost any chance at a normal life, and now I'm stuck in politics forever. Exactly. It's perfect. Mira pulled back, grinning. Don't you see? You came here trying to disappear, and instead you became the most visible, common-born person in the kingdom. You're going to change everything. Elara looked around the great hall, at the nobles still whispering in corners, at the servants watching with hope, at Kael speaking with General Voss about next steps, at Cassandra being congratulated by neutral houses already trying to curry favor. This wasn't the ending she'd imagined. It wasn't safety or obscurity or escape. It was responsibility and danger and the weight of representing millions of people who'd never had a voice before. It was terrifying. It was also exactly where she needed to be. I'm going to try, Elara said. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do. Mira squeezed her hand, and you won't be doing it alone. The sun rose higher, light streaming through the great hall's windows. A new day, a new position, a new chapter in the kingdom's history. Elara Vance had come to the capital trying to avoid being chosen, trying to stay invisible, trying to protect herself from a system that destroyed women like her mother. Instead, she'd exposed corruption, survived assassination attempts, and fundamentally altered the balance of power in the kingdom. She hadn't won a crown, but she'd won something more valuable, a voice that couldn't be silenced, an authority that couldn't be dismissed. The girl who'd faked a limp to disappear had become the voice of the commons, impossible to ignore. And the real work was just beginning. And the real work was just beginning. 3 months passed like a storm, violent, transformative, and impossible to ignore. Elara's first council meeting as voice of the commons had lasted 6 hours and ended with 2 noble representatives walking out in protest. Her second meeting went worse. Duke Morven's remaining allies attempted to filibuster every proposal she made, burying her recommendations under procedural objections and bureaucratic delays. By the third meeting, she'd learned to fight fire with fire, using the same arcane rules against them, exposing their obstruction tactics in public records that Master Aldrich helpfully leaked to the city's news sheets. The common people loved it, the nobles hated it, and Kael backed her completely, which made all the difference. But it was exhausting. Elara sat in her new office, a converted storage room she'd claimed specifically because it was far from the noble quarters, reviewing reports from the southern mining district. The medical intervention had worked. Infection rates were down, productivity was recovering, and most importantly, the workers were alive. It was a tangible victory, proof that her solutions could work in the real world. It was also ammunition for her enemies, who argued that the cost of saving 500 miners could have funded a year's worth of military improvements or infrastructure projects that benefited everyone, as if human lives were just another budget line item to be weighed against roads and bridges. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mira or one of the junior administrators she'd recruited from common backgrounds. Instead, Cassandra entered, looking unusually uncertain. The soon-to-be queen had maintained a careful distance over the past months, publicly supportive, privately neutral, their interactions limited to council meetings where professionalism overrode personal history. "Lady Cassandra," Elara said, standing, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know. I should have sent word ahead." Cassandra closed the door behind her, then seemed to struggle with what to say next. "I need your help." Elara blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, that wasn't on the list. With what? "The wedding." Cassandra's jaw tightened. "It's scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Grand ceremony, every noble house invited, maximum political theater, and I'm expected to smile through it all while knowing it's a transaction, not a marriage." "You agreed to this arrangement." "I know, and I don't regret it. I'm going to be queen, which is everything I was raised to want. But," Cassandra moved to the window, her perfect posture cracking slightly. "The wedding night traditions, the inspection, the public consummation verification. It's barbaric, and His Majesty says I can refuse any tradition I find objectionable, but if I refuse too much, the nobles will claim the marriage is invalid." Elara's stomach turned. She'd heard about the old traditions, remnants of a time when royal marriages were entirely about producing heirs and proving legitimacy. Most kingdoms had abandoned them decades ago, but conservative nobles here clung to them like sacred texts. You want me to help you reform the wedding traditions. I want you to use your position to make it politically impossible for them to enforce the worst ones. You're the voice of the commons. Speak for the common-born women who've suffered under these same degrading practices when they marry into noble families. Make it about more than just me. Cassandra turned back, her eyes fierce. Help me turn my wedding into a statement about how we treat women in this kingdom. It was the first time Cassandra had voluntarily allied with her on something personal rather than political. Elara studied her former enemy, seeing the calculation but also genuine anger beneath it. I'll need specifics. Which traditions are you most concerned about? They spent an hour mapping out strategy. By the time Cassandra left, Elara had a plan that would transform a royal wedding from a display of patriarchal ownership into a demonstration of partnership and consent. It would infuriate conservative nobles, delight reformers, and set precedents that would ripple through the entire kingdom. It was exactly the kind of fight she'd signed up for. The next council meeting was scheduled for the following morning, but Elara arrived early to find the chamber already occupied. Kael stood at the head of the table, reviewing documents with General Voss. He looked tired. The past months had been brutal for him too, navigating noble rebellion, military logistics, and the constant political pressure from all sides. You're here early, he noted without looking up. So are you. I'm always here early. It's the only time I get work done without interruptions. He signed something, handed it to Voss, then finally met her eyes. What do you need? Straight to business. That's how it had been between them since the challenge. Professional, efficient, carefully distant. They worked together seamlessly, but the intimacy from that night in his chambers had been locked away, too dangerous to acknowledge. Lady Cassandra came to me yesterday, Elara said, about the wedding traditions. Kael's expression flickered. I told her she could refuse anything she wanted. And she knows that puts you in an impossible position. If she refuses everything, conservatives cry fraud. If she accepts everything, we're endorsing practices that belong in history books, not modern ceremonies. Elara pulled out her notes. So we're going to reform them publicly, using the wedding as a platform to demonstrate new standards. She outlined the plan. Kael listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from skeptical to thoughtful to something like admiration. You want to turn my wedding into a political revolution, he said when she finished. I want to turn it into a statement that women are partners, not property, that consent matters, that traditions can evolve without losing meaning. She met his gaze steadily. Unless you'd prefer to stick with the old ways. You know I wouldn't. He was quiet for a moment. This will make enemies. More than you already have. I'm aware. Some of those enemies have tried to kill you before. Successfully reforming royal wedding traditions will make you an even bigger target. Also aware. Kael's hands pressed flat against the table. Why do you keep doing this? Putting yourself in danger for causes that don't directly benefit you? Because they benefit others. Isn't that enough? For most people, no. Most people prioritize survival over principle. Then maybe I'm not most people. Elara leaned forward. You asked me to stay and help tear down a broken system. This is part of that system. If we can't even reform how we celebrate marriages, how are we supposed to tackle the bigger structural problems? The corner of Kael's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You're going to give Master Aldrich a heart attack. He's already having anxiety about the ceremony breaking precedent. Master Aldrich will document it all beautifully, and future historians will call it progressive. Or catastrophic, depending on how it goes. But Kael was nodding. All right, present your proposal at this morning's council meeting. If you can get majority support, we'll implement it. That's a high bar. The conservatives will fight this. Then convince them. That's what you're good at. The council meeting was exactly as contentious as Elara expected. The moment she presented the wedding reform proposal, Duke Morven's remaining allies erupted in protest. This is sacrilege, Lord Brennan declared, his jowls quivering with outrage. Royal weddings have followed these traditions for centuries. To change them now is to acknowledge that centuries-old practices might not serve modern needs, Elara interrupted calmly, unless you'd also like to bring back trial by combat and debt slavery, since those were traditional too. That's not the same. It's exactly the same. Tradition isn't sacred just because it's old. It's valuable when it serves a purpose and harmful when it doesn't. She gestured to the proposal documents distributed to each council member. We're not eliminating ceremony or meaning. We're removing the degrading aspects that treat the bride as property being transferred between families. Lady Marin spoke up from her position. The proposed changes maintain all symbolic elements while eliminating physical inspection and public consummation verification. The marriage remains legally binding, the ceremony remains grand, and the political alliances remain intact. What exactly is the objection? The objection is that this commoner, Lord Brennan jabbed a finger at Elara, is using her position to impose her values on institutions that predate her birth by generations. My values, Elara said coldly, are that women deserve dignity and consent in all aspects of their lives, including marriage. If you find that objectionable, that says more about you than me. The room erupted again, some nobles shouting agreement, others demanding her removal, neutral parties trying to find middle ground. Cassandra sat perfectly still, her face a mask, but her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. Kale let it go on for exactly 30 seconds before slamming his hand on the table. Enough. Silence fell. The voice of the Commons has presented a proposal backed by legal precedent and humanitarian reasoning. We will vote on it using standard council procedures. Those in favor? Hands rose slowly. Lady Marin, Master Aldrich, General Voss, 3 junior council members from merchant backgrounds, 2 minor nobles who'd been quietly supportive of reforms. Not enough. Those opposed? Duke Morven's faction raised their hands immediately. 6 nobles who'd survived the conspiracy purge by being clever enough not to leave evidence. Lord Brennan, 2 military commanders from conservative houses. Still not enough to win or lose. Everyone looked at the neutral faction, 5 nobles who'd been carefully avoiding choosing sides, playing both ends against the middle. Their votes would decide it. The eldest among them, Countess Sarah, cleared her throat. May I propose an amendment? Elara's stomach sank. Amendments were how proposals died, death by 1,000 small compromises until nothing meaningful remained. Speak, Kael said. We implement these reforms for the royal wedding, but allow individual noble families to choose whether to adopt them for their own ceremonies. Those who value tradition can maintain it. Those who prefer reform can follow the royal example. Choice, not mandate. It was clever. It gave conservatives their out while still creating the symbolic precedent Elara wanted. Half a victory instead of none. I accept that amendment, Elara said before anyone could object. As long as the royal wedding sets the new standard publicly. Countess Sarah nodded. Then I vote in favor. The other neutral nobles followed her lead. The proposal passed by a narrow margin, 11-9. Duke Morven's face was purple, but he'd lost and knew it. Lord Brennan actually stood and walked out. But Cassandra's clenched hands relaxed, and across the table she mouthed 2 words at Elara. Thank you. The wedding ceremony was held on the first day of spring, when frost finally released its grip on the capital. The Great Hall had been transformed, flowers everywhere, light streaming through stained glass windows, hundreds of witnesses packed into every available space. It was magnificent and overwhelming and exactly the kind of spectacle that made Elara grateful she wasn't the one getting married. She stood with the council members, wearing the formal robes of her new position, deep blue trimmed with silver, marking her as both common-born and royal authority. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Cassandra entered to trumpet fanfare, and even Elara had to admit she was stunning. Her gown was a masterpiece of white silk and silver embroidery, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that somehow looked both traditional and modern. She walked alone, not escorted by her father, who remained imprisoned for treason, or any male relative. Just herself, making her own choice. First reform. The bride walks herself to the altar. Kale waited at the front, dressed in black and silver, his expression carefully neutral. When Cassandra reached him, he didn't take her hand possessively or claim her with any physical gesture. Instead, he bowed, a gesture of respect between equals. Second reform. The groom acknowledges the bride's autonomy. The ceremony proceeded with modified vows. Instead of the traditional language about obedience and duty, they exchanged promises of partnership, support, and shared governance. Master Aldrich conducted the service, his voice carrying to every corner as he blessed the Union not as master and possession, but as allies and partners. Third reform. Vows emphasize equality, not hierarchy. And when it came time for the symbolic joining, traditionally a moment where the groom would physically lift and carry the bride to demonstrate his strength and her submission, Kael offered his hand. Cassandra took it. They walked together from the altar, side by side. Fourth reform. The couple moves forward as partners, not as conqueror and conquered. The conservatives in attendance looked like they'd swallowed glass. The reformers were openly crying, and the common people watching from the gallery erupted in cheers. At the reception afterward, Elara found herself cornered by Countess Sarah. "That was well done," the older woman said quietly. "You've created a template other families will follow, whether they admit it publicly or not. That was the goal. And you've made more enemies in the process. Duke Morven's faction is already planning their response." Elara's hand tightened on her wine glass. "What kind of response?" "The legal kind, fortunately. They're drafting legislation to limit the voice of the commons' authority, specifically your ability to influence cultural and traditional matters." Countess Sarah's expression was sympathetic. "They can't attack you physically anymore, not after what happened to Duke Thorne and Lord Terran. So they're trying to neutralize you politically. Let them try. I've learned a few things about political maneuvering. I'm sure you have. Just be careful. The law is their territory. They've been playing these games for generations." As Countess Sarah moved away, Mira appeared with a plate of food. "You need to eat something. You've been working nonstop for 3 months." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. I can see it." Mira forced the plate into her hands. 5 minutes. Sit down, eat, and pretend you're a normal person at a wedding instead of a revolutionary changing the kingdom. Elara found a quiet corner and did as ordered. The food was excellent. Delicate pastries, roasted meats, fresh bread, but she barely tasted it. Her mind was already racing ahead to Duke Morven's next move, to the legislation Countess Sarah had mentioned, to the dozen other battles waiting on the horizon. "You're thinking too loud." She looked up to find Kael standing over her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered one. "Dance with me." "That's inappropriate. You just got married." "To a political ally who's currently dancing with General Voss as part of her diplomatic duties. One dance with my voice of the commons won't scandalize anyone more than we already have." He tilted his head toward the floor. "Unless you're afraid." She wasn't afraid. She was terrified. Not of the dance, but of what it represented. 3 months of careful distance, of professional boundaries, of denying the connection that had formed between them. One dance could shatter all of that. But she took his hand anyway. The dance floor was crowded enough that they weren't the center of attention. Kael led her through the steps with practiced ease, his hand warm against hers, his presence overwhelming despite the space he carefully maintained between them. "You did well today," he said quietly. The reforms, the ceremony, it was exactly what the kingdom needed to see. Cassandra did the hard part. I just provided political cover. You did more than that. You created a framework that will outlive both of us. He spun her gently. "Do you know what the common people are calling you?" "I'm afraid to ask." "The Iron Voice. They say you speak for them with a strength that can't be bent or broken." His eyes held hers. "They're right. I'm not made of iron. I'm just stubborn." "There's a difference?" His smile was slight but genuine. "Elara, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "If this is about the legislation Duke Morven's planning, it's not about that. It's about—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "When I asked you to stay, to become voice of the commons, I told you it would be dangerous and thankless. I didn't tell you it would also be this. Watching you fight battles I should be fighting, seeing you targeted because of decisions I made, knowing you're giving up any chance at a normal life because I needed you. You didn't force me. I chose this." "I know. That's what makes it worse." The music swelled around them. "You could have left, could have gone home, gotten married to some merchant's son, lived a peaceful life. Instead, you're here, making enemies, and risking everything for a kingdom that will never fully appreciate what you've sacrificed. You appreciate it. That's enough." "Is it? Because some days I think I'm being selfish, keeping you here when you deserve so much more." Elara tightened her grip on his hand. Stop. You're not keeping me anywhere. I'm staying because this work matters, because changing the kingdom matters more than personal comfort or safety. She held his gaze, and because I can't imagine doing anything else. The song ended. They stood there for a moment longer than appropriate, hands still joined, eyes locked. Then Cassandra appeared beside them, her smile bright and political. Your Majesty, the noble houses are waiting to offer formal congratulations, and Miss Vance, several council members wanted to discuss the upcoming infrastructure proposals with you. Her tone was perfectly pleasant, but the message was clear, separate. Maintain appearances, remember your roles. Kale released Elara's hand and bowed slightly. Of course. Thank you for the dance, voice of the Commons. It was an honor, Your Majesty. They moved apart, returning to their respective duties. But Elara could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers, could still see the conflict in his eyes. She wondered if this was what the rest of her life would be. Moments of connection followed by necessary distance, partnership without the fairy tale ending she'd never wanted, but had somehow started hoping for anyway. The legislation Duke Morven promised arrived 2 weeks later, a comprehensive bill designed to limit the voice of the Commons' authority to purely economic and labor matters, stripping away influence over cultural, traditional, and ceremonial issues. It was cleverly written, full of legal precedent and reasonable-sounding justifications. It would also gut Elara's position and render her mostly symbolic. They're boxing you in, Mira said, reading over the proposal in Elara's office. If this passes, you can advocate for better wages and work conditions, but you can't touch anything that actually changes power structures. I'm aware. Elara was already drafting her counter-argument, which is why I'm going to destroy it publicly. The council session where the legislation was debated lasted 14 hours. Duke Morven's faction presented their case with polished rhetoric and legal precision. They weren't attacking Elara personally. They were too smart for that after the wedding reform's success. Instead, they framed it as clarification and proper boundaries, ensuring the voice of the Commons stayed focused on their core mandate. When it was Elara's turn to respond, she stood and looked each council member in the eye. This legislation sounds reasonable. It uses moderate language and claims to simply clarify existing authority, but let me tell you what it actually does. She pulled out her own analysis, years of watching her mother navigate noble politics finally paying off. It strips the voice of the Commons of any power to address systemic inequality. It ensures that common-born people can advocate for slightly higher wages within a fundamentally unjust system, but can never challenge the system itself. She walked around the table as she spoke, meeting eyes, making it personal. Cultural and ceremonial matters aren't separate from economic ones. When wedding traditions treat women as property, that affects inheritance laws, which affects economic opportunity. When selection processes favor nobles, that creates barriers to social mobility, which perpetuates wealth inequality. You can't separate these issues, except by design, to maintain power structures that benefit those at the top. Lord Brennan tried to interrupt. Elara spoke over him. This legislation is about fear. Fear that a common-born voice might actually change things that have been broken for centuries. Fear that if we fix the cultural foundations of inequality, the economic and political advantages nobles enjoy might disappear. She stopped at Duke Morven's seat. And you're right to be afraid. Because I'm going to dismantle every unjust tradition, every corrupt practice, every system that maintains your power at the expense of common welfare. That's my job. That's what the king appointed me to do. She returned to her position. So vote on this legislation. Strip my authority if you want, but understand that the common people are watching. They see who votes to limit their voice. They see who's afraid of change. And they won't forget. The vote was closer than before, 10-10, which meant it failed to pass. Duke Morven's face was murderous, but he'd lost again. After the session, Lady Marin cornered her in the hallway. That was reckless. You essentially threatened half the council. I stated facts. You declared war, but Lady Marin was smiling. Well done. They needed to hear it. Spring turned to summer. The southern mines recovered fully, operating with new safety standards and health protocols that Elara had helped draft. The workers sent a formal letter of thanks to the capital, addressed not to the king, but to the voice of the Commons. It hung framed in her office, a reminder of why she endured the political battles. More reforms followed. Labor standards for palace servants, ensuring they received fair wages and time off. New education initiatives allowing common-born children to attend schools previously reserved for nobles. Restructuring of the tax code to close loopholes that let wealthy families avoid contributing to public works. Each reform passed by narrow margins. Each one made more enemies. And each one changed lives. Elara's assassination attempt came on a humid summer night, 6 months into her tenure. She was walking back to her chambers from a late council session when 3 figures emerged from the shadows. They wore no identifying marks, carried blades designed to kill quietly, and moved with professional efficiency. Elara ran. She'd learned the palace layout intimately over the months, knew which corridors had guards and which were isolated. She ran toward the occupied sections, screaming for help, her heart hammering as footsteps pounded behind her. A blade whistled past her head, embedding in the wall. Another cut across her shoulder. A shallow wound, but painful and bleeding. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Guards appeared ahead, drawn by her screams. The assassins melted back into shadows, disappearing as quickly as they'd come. Elara collapsed against the wall, her shoulder burning, her hands shaking with adrenaline. General Vance arrived minutes later with a full security detail. They found nothing, no assassins, no evidence beyond the blade in the wall and Elara's wound. Professional work. Untraceable. Kael arrived while the palace physician was stitching her shoulder, his face absolutely white with fury. Who did this? I don't know. They didn't stop to introduce themselves. This isn't a joke, Elara. I'm aware. I'm the one bleeding. She winced as the physician pulled another stitch tight. But they failed, and now you have justification for increasing security throughout the palace. Use it. I'm increasing your personal security. Full-time guards, no more walking alone. No. That's not negotiable. Yes, it is. Elara met his eyes steadily. The moment I start hiding behind guards, the moment I act afraid, my enemies win. The common people need to see that their voice can't be intimidated. I'm not changing my behavior because someone tried to kill me. They might succeed next time. Then they succeed, but I won't give them victory through fear. The physician finished and left them alone. Kael paced the small medical room like a caged animal, his control fracturing at the edges. You're going to get yourself killed, he said finally. And I won't. He stopped, turning away. You matter too much. To the reforms, to the kingdom. You can't just throw yourself at danger and hope you survive. I'm not throwing myself at anything. I'm doing my job, and yes, that involves risk. You knew that when you appointed me. She stood carefully, her shoulder throbbing. Don't ask me to be less than what you need me to be just because it's dangerous. What I need, he broke off, his jaw working. What I need is irrelevant. What the kingdom needs is for you to survive long enough to finish what you started. Then help me. Find who ordered this. Make an example of them. Show everyone that attacking the voice of the commons has consequences. He did. 3 days later, General Vance arrested 2 minor nobles and a hired mercenary. The evidence was circumstantial but sufficient. Payments from the nobles' accounts, the mercenary's confession under interrogation, a pattern of anti-reform rhetoric matching the assassination attempt's timing. The trial was public. The verdict was guilty. And the punishment was exile. Their lands seized, their titles stripped, their names erased from noble registries. It sent a message. Threaten the reforms, lose everything. Summer faded to autumn. The kingdom's grain harvest was the best in a decade, partly because new agricultural policies Elara had championed gave farmers more control over their own production. Trade increased as reformed tax codes made commerce more profitable for merchants. Even some conservative nobles grudgingly admitted the reforms were working, but the real transformation was harder to measure. It showed up in small moments, servants walking with straighter backs, knowing they had legal recourse if mistreated, common-born children attending classes alongside noble ones, their potential no longer limited by birth. Women negotiating marriage contracts with actual say in the terms. The kingdom was changing, slowly, painfully, against fierce opposition, but changing nonetheless. Elara celebrated her first anniversary as voice of the commons in her small office, alone except for a mountain of paperwork. No ceremony, no recognition, just another day of work. A knock interrupted her reading. "Come in." Cassandra entered, heavily pregnant with the heir everyone had been waiting for. Being queen suited her. She'd thrown herself into the role with the same fierce determination she'd once applied to competing in the selection. She and Kael maintained a cordial partnership, more colleagues than spouses, but it seemed to work for both of them. "I have something for you," Cassandra said, handing her a sealed document. Elara opened it and read, then read again, not quite believing what she was seeing. "This is a formal petition signed by 30 noble houses requesting expansion of the voice of the Commons authority," she said slowly. "They're asking you to have more power, not less." Not all of them asked willingly. Some required encouragement. Cassandra settled into a chair with the careful movements of late pregnancy. But they all signed. The reforms are working, Elara. Even the conservatives can see it. And while they'll never admit you were right, they can admit the kingdom is better off. Why are you giving this to me? Because you earned it. Because the kingdom needs you to succeed. And because, Cassandra paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, because I've learned that power isn't about titles or crowns. It's about actually changing things. You have more real power than I do, and you got it by being right when everyone else was wrong. It was the closest Cassandra had come to genuine friendship. Elara felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for this, and for everything you've done to support the reforms. We're on the same side now. Strange how things work out." Cassandra stood carefully. "The council votes on the expansion next week. It should pass easily. I've already secured the votes. Consider it an anniversary gift." She left, and Elara sat alone with the document, feeling the weight of what it represented. Expanded authority meant more battles, more enemies, more risk. It also meant more opportunity to actually fix the broken systems that had hurt so many people. She thought about her mother, hollowed out by a system that had used and discarded her. She thought about the miners who'd been saved by reforms that prioritized lives over profits. She thought about all the women throughout history who'd had no voice, no choice, no power to change their circumstances. And she thought about the girl who'd come to the capital with a fake limp and a desperate plan to disappear. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, more dangerous. Someone who'd learned to fight with laws and words instead of just survival instincts. Someone who'd become exactly what the kingdom needed, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet life she'd once wanted. The expansion passed unanimously. Even Duke Morven voted in favor, recognizing that opposing it was political suicide now that the reforms had proven successful. Winter came again, completing the cycle. 1 year since Elara had first entered the selection hall, terrified and determined to escape. Now she stood in the same hall, addressing a crowd of common-born citizens who'd been invited to hear the voice of the Commons' annual report. She talked about what they'd accomplished: better labor standards, educational access, reformed marriage laws, agricultural improvements. She talked about what still needed fixing: inheritance laws that favored nobles, legal systems that treated common and noble crimes differently, housing shortages in the capital's poorest districts. And she talked about the future. "Change is slow," she told them. "It's frustrating and exhausting, and sometimes it feels like we're fighting an endless battle against people determined to maintain the status quo. But every small victory matters. Every law we change, every tradition we reform, every time we prove that common-born voices deserve to be heard, it all adds up." She looked out at faces that reflected her own background: workers and merchants, servants and farmers, people who'd been invisible their entire lives. "You have power now. Use it. Demand better from those who govern you. Hold us accountable. Don't let anyone tell you that your birth determines your worth or that tradition is more important than justice." The applause was deafening. That night, she stood on her office balcony watching snow fall over the capital. The city sparkled with lights, thousands of lives going on beneath her, most of them better off than they'd been a year ago. Not perfect, not even close, but better. Footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Kael. "You should be inside," he said, draping a cloak over her shoulders. "It's freezing out here." "I needed air, perspective." She pulled the cloak tighter. "Do you ever regret appointing me?" Never. Why would you ask that? Because I've made your life infinitely more complicated. The noble houses that still oppose the reforms blame me, which reflects on you. The assassination attempt was my fault for being too visible, too defiant. And every battle I fight costs you political capital. And every battle you win strengthens the kingdom. The trade-off is more than worth it. He leaned against the balcony railing beside her. Cassandra told me about the expansion vote. Congratulations. Thank you, though I suspect she did most of the actual work securing votes. She did, but she was motivated by what you've accomplished. Everyone is. He was quiet for a moment. Do you know what the history books will say about this year? Probably that it was chaotic and controversial. They'll say it was the year the kingdom changed. The year a commoner became voice of the commons and proved that power doesn't require noble blood. The year reforms that had been debated for decades finally happened because someone had the courage to fight for them. He looked at her. They'll say it was the year you transformed everything. We transformed it. You, me, Cassandra, everyone who supported the reforms. Don't diminish what you did. I gave you a title. You made it mean something. His voice softened. You took an impossible position and turned it into the most powerful voice in the kingdom. That's extraordinary. Snow fell between them, soft and silent. Elara thought about the past year, the fights, the victories, the losses, the moments of connection with this man who'd given her power and then watched her wield it better than anyone expected. Do you think we'll actually succeed? She asked quietly. Long term, I mean. Will the reforms stick, or will the next king undo everything we've built? That depends on whether we build foundations strong enough to outlast us. Legal precedents, cultural shifts, a generation of common-born people who grow up believing they deserve equality. He turned to face her fully. It depends on whether the voice of the commons continues to speak with the same strength after you. After me? Nothing lasts forever, Elara. Eventually you'll want to retire or focus on other things, or... He broke off, something painful crossing his face. Or you'll find someone who makes you want a life outside politics. And when that happens, the position needs to be strong enough to survive without you. I'm not going anywhere. Not now, but someday. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. Someday you'll realize you've given enough, sacrificed enough, and I'll have to let you go, even though the thought of this kingdom without your voice in it is... He trailed off. Is what? Unbearable, he said quietly. They stood in the falling snow, the distance between them measured in inches and impossibilities. He was married to Cassandra, bound by political alliance and duty. She was voice of the commons, her power depended on remaining unattached to personal ambition or royal favor. They could never be what that moment in his chambers had hinted at, never explore what might have grown between them under different circumstances. But they could stand together in the snow, partners in transformation, anchoring each other through the weight of responsibility. I'm not going anywhere, Elara repeated, not while there's still work to do. There will always be work to do. Then I guess you're stuck with me. He smiled, genuine, warm, the expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to breathtaking. Good. 5 years later, Master Aldrich completed his chronicle of the Reform era. He dedicated an entire chapter to the voice of the commons, documenting every battle, every victory, every moment that had transformed a desperate girl's attempt to disappear into a revolution that changed the kingdom. The chapter ended with a quote from Elara herself, spoken during her 5th anniversary address. I came to the capital trying to be invisible. I thought survival meant staying small, staying silent, never challenging the systems that crushed people like me. I was wrong. Real survival, meaningful survival, requires standing up, speaking out, refusing to accept that things can't change just because they've always been a certain way. And if standing up makes you visible, if speaking out makes you a target, then you stand anyway. You speak anyway. Because the alternative is living in a cage you help build through your silence. The book became required reading in schools throughout the kingdom. Common-born children read about Elara Vance and learned that their voices mattered. Noble children read it and learned that power required responsibility. And future generations looked back at the Reform era as the moment everything changed. But Elara herself didn't think much about legacy or history. She was too busy fighting the next battle, fixing the next broken system, speaking for the next person who'd been silenced. The palace that had once felt like a cage had become her home. The position she'd never wanted had become her purpose, and the kingdom that had tried to make her invisible had instead been transformed by her refusal to disappear. She stood in her office one crisp autumn morning, now 10 years into her tenure, reviewing proposals for educational reform. Mira worked across from her. She'd been appointed assistant voice of the Commons 3 years prior, ensuring the position would outlive its founder. Cassandra's children occasionally visited, curious and precocious, already being raised with the understanding that common and noble blood both mattered equally. Kael entered without knocking, a privilege he'd claimed years ago and she'd never revoked. His hair showed gray at the temples now, his face lined with the weight of a decade of kingship. But his eyes still held that same sharp intelligence, that same respect when he looked at her. "The northern provinces are requesting you visit next month," he said, dropping a stack of letters on her desk. "They want to implement local versions of the Commons voice position and need guidance. The northern provinces hate me. They think I'm a radical corrupting traditional values. They did hate you. Now they're copying you. That's called winning." He settled into the chair across from her desk, Cassandra's old seat, though the queen rarely visited anymore, busy with her own initiatives and their 3 children. "Will you go?" "Of course. Though I'm bringing Mira. She needs to learn how to handle hostile audiences." "I'm sitting right here," Mira protested, "and I've handled plenty of hostile audiences." "Not like northern conservatives. They make Duke Morven look progressive." They discussed logistics, schedules, security concerns. The conversation was comfortable, practiced, the rhythm of a decade of partnership. When Mira left to draft travel plans, Kael remained. "There's something else," he said. Elara looked up from her notes. "What?" "Duke Morven died last night, heart failure, peaceful, in his sleep." Elara set down her pen. Duke Morven, her greatest opponent, the man who'd tried to limit her power, who'd challenged Kael's judgment, who'd fought every reform tooth and nail. She should feel triumph at his passing. Instead, she felt something more complicated. "He never gave up," she said quietly, "never stopped fighting for what he believed in, even when he was clearly losing." "You sound almost respectful." "I respected his consistency, if not his values. He believed the old ways were better, and he fought for them until the end. That's something. His son will take his seat on the council. Marcus Morven, mid-30s, educated abroad, reportedly more progressive than his father." Kael's expression was unreadable. "There's a rumor he's been quietly supportive of several recent reforms. So we might actually gain an ally from our greatest enemy's death. Strange how things work out." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside the window, the capital sprawled beneath them, larger now, more prosperous, undeniably changed from the city Elara had first entered a decade ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Kael asked suddenly. "Staying, giving up any chance at a normal life." It was the same question he'd asked years ago on the snowy balcony. Her answer then had been defiant certainty. Now, with a decade of battles behind her, she considered it more carefully. "I regret the assassination attempts," she said finally. "I regret making enemies who will hate me until they die. I regret never having time for anything except work." She met his eyes. "But I don't regret the work itself. I don't regret speaking for people who couldn't speak for themselves. And I don't regret partnering with you to build something that will outlive us both. Even though it cost you everything else?" "It didn't cost me everything. It gave me purpose, meaning, the knowledge that I mattered, that my life meant something beyond just surviving." She smiled slightly. "The girl who came here trying to disappear would have lived and died invisible. This version of me, the one who stayed and fought, she'll be remembered. Maybe not fondly by everyone, but remembered. That's worth the cost." Kael was quiet for a long moment. "You're the strongest person I know." "I'm just stubborn." "Same thing." He stood, moving toward the door, then paused. "Elara?" "Yes?" "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for being exactly who the kingdom needed, even when it didn't deserve you." He left before she could respond. Elara sat alone in her office, surrounded by documents and proposals and the endless work of transformation. She thought about her mother, who died 5 years ago peacefully in her sleep, having lived long enough to see her daughter become the most powerful common-born person in the kingdom's history. She thought about all the people whose lives had been changed by reforms she'd fought for: better wages, safer working conditions, legal protections, educational opportunities. And she thought about the girl with a fake limp who tried so desperately to disappear. That girl had been terrified of being seen, of being chosen, of being trapped in a system designed to break women. She'd fought so hard to stay invisible that she'd nearly missed the opportunity to be extraordinary. But she hadn't missed it. She'd grabbed it with both hands, despite the fear, despite the danger, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. And in doing so, she had become impossible to ignore. The palace that had once been a cage was now her fortress. The system that had tried to destroy her had been reshaped by her hands. And the kingdom that had seen her as worthless now couldn't function without her voice. 20 years later, when Elara Vance finally retired from her position as voice of the commons, the entire kingdom mourned the loss. But her legacy lived on, in the laws she'd shaped, the precedents she'd set, the generation of common-born leaders she'd inspired. And in the small office in the palace, where a portrait hung of a young woman with fierce eyes and an unwavering spine, standing beside a king who'd given her power and a kingdom that had been transformed by her refusal to disappear. The girl who'd faked a limp to avoid being chosen had instead been chosen by history itself, not as a queen, but as something more important. A voice that couldn't be silenced, a force that couldn't be stopped, a revolution that had started with a single act of defiance and had changed everything.